Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Housing and Environment Overview Scrutiny Committee of the Thursday, 18th of July. There's two main papers and the minutes to confirm, but we'll go through the agenda in the normal manner. Item 1, fire evacuation. There is no planned fire, so any alarm is genuine, so please vacate the building. 2, webcasting. It is being webcast, yes? Yes, it is being webcast. 3, receive apologies for absence. I have 1, Councillor Peach, and on 4 he's being replaced by Councillor Sherlock, so welcome Councillor Sherlock here. Do we have any other apologies or replacements? Okay, thank you. 5, declaration of conflict of interest or whipping decisions. I'm not aware of any. 6, urgent items. There are none. 7, to confirm the minutes. This is paper A. We have Councillor Washbourne, Councillor Waldridge and Councillor Beerman. Right. Councillor Washbourne, you were first.
Thank you. Just want to make an amendment to where we noted about the climate change panel, and just to say that Mrs. Woodridge has now stood down from the panel, and I've taken over, and that took effect as of that meeting.
So that's 713, correct?
713, yes. Yep.
Is that noted? If it was correct on the night, then it should actually stay as these minutes state. But if it was changed before, then yes, we can change it.
It was changed before.
Thank you for that. Okay. Councillor Waldridge. Councillor Mrs. James, thank you.
Thank you. My point relates to page 4 of 43, 413. It is an issue in relation to the webcast of the 23rd of the 13th, but I've raised it with the officers, but rather go into it now. I've had a reassurance from the officers that they're going to look at this and come back to me. So thank you.
I thank you for the email, but it's too late to really resolve tonight, and as the officer said, they will resolve it and we'll have an email regarding it. Councillor Beerman.
Councillor Washbourne's observations just made me think of something else, and I don't know that this is wrong, and anyway it's probably right as far as the minutes are concerned, but I do note that Councillor Donnell is put down as a member of the climate change panel. That might be because that was the makeup of the panel last year, but am I not right in suspecting that a portfolio holder wouldn't sit on one of these panels? That might be mistaken, I don't know. I don't have a particular problem. He attends and he contributes, but I don't know that he would be a voting member. It would be nice if somebody could either clarify that now or later.
Could the officer clarify, please? The count at the moment will be clarified later, but I believe last year a portfolio holder sat on the climate change. I believe it's correct, but it will be clarified.
Well, I believe she was a visitor as opposed to a member of the panel. I might be wrong, but that's how I thought it was.
It's been raised, it will be looked at, and again, could the whole committee be emailed in response? Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so taking the minutes as such, page 6. The bullet points at the bottom, the second bullet point, it says here, Dr. Surrey, however, this should be in addition to normal services and should not reduce face-to-face contact. I didn't believe that was the spirit of it. I would have thought it needs the word something like not necessarily. The way that's written, it implies that however effective this remote analysis is, it shouldn't reduce the face-to-face contact. Well, if it reduces face-to-face contact as well without reducing the service, then there's no problem. I would like to see it reduce face-to-face contact if that achieves the result. And I think I was the person who said I wouldn't want to lose the opportunity for face-to-face contact.
I actually have no problem with that. Does anybody else have any problem with inserting the word necessarily before reduce. If anybody does have a problem, please speak.
Thank you. As I say, I have a few, as I warned you beforehand. I'm now on to the next page, and the bullet points on page 7, the two at the bottom. It seems to me this is sort of almost tautologous. It says some members felt that the weekly bin collection should remain in the Constitution, fine, while others believe that the weekly bin collection should remain. So it seems to be saying the same thing twice to me. I thought, unless one is trying to say, but it's in a very cumbersome fashion, whilst others believe the weekly bin collection should remain whilst wanted. But you see, it then goes on to say the borough to do so as no research has been done to support this. I really feel that whole paragraph is certainly not plain English, and I'm not quite sure what it's trying to say. I mean, I know what we decided, which was that we shouldn't have alternate weekly collections forced on us. I accept that that was the conclusion of the discussion. I don't think that's very clear out of that.
It would be a shorter minute if we said committee agreed alternate weekly collection should not be forced on us. Could I ask Councillor Still to comment, because it was her.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, on page 8 of 43, it goes on to say what was resolved, the inclusion of the right for Basingstoke and Dean to continue with weekly bin collections. So that's what I wanted. That's in there. Not quite sure about this paragraph. We need to make it very clear in the Constitution or the plan that we remain to stay with weekly bin collection.
Chair, I accept that that was the outcome of the discussion. I'm not challenging that. I'm just trying to make sure that what is here is understandable and makes sense. And at the moment, it's not making sense to me the way it's working.
There was discussion about putting it into the Constitution.
Yep.
That had some support around the committee. I don't think we voted on it, but it did have support. And others believed that it should only remain whilst it was beneficial to the borough.
Yes. If those words are used like that, with all the rest taken out, I think it makes more sense.
So do you wish to say, as no research has been done to support this, do you wish that to come out?
Well, I'm not sure what the this is. It says no research has been done to support this. Is that to support weekly, alternate weekly, or what? The way it's worded, it means there's been no research to support weekly bin collections. I'm not sure that's what we were trying to say.
So, can I ask Councillor Still, because this was you were mentioning, if after beneficial to the borough, the last to do so was deleted, would you still be happy? Would that be an accurate minute of the meeting?
Oh, sorry,
I can't remember actually what was said. I mean, it was how many weeks ago? I can't remember what happened yesterday, let alone 2, 3, 4 weeks ago. What I'm trying to say is, we want to keep, it was the action plan. In that action plan, I don't know where this has come from. I do remember a debate going on about, well, hold on a minute, some of us don't want weekly bin collection, we want to look at going to alternate weekly collection, but, that has to be looked into. I wanted to absolutely squash that once and for all. We don't want to look into it. We've got no intention of looking into it. We want to keep our weekly bin collection, the majority of us. So I don't know how you're going to word it.
Ask Councillor Baker to come in, please.
Yeah, if it helps, Chair, I think the discussion was about the Constitution, and there's a paragraph or a phrase in the Constitution that allows members of Project Integra have flexibility to determine their own collection arrangements, and the discussion was about whether we were happy with that phrasing in the Constitution, or whether we wanted the Constitution to explicitly say that it should allow that Basingstoke and Dean can continue with weekly bin collection. But that was the context of the actual debate that we had, that minute was referring to.
Councillor Bierman.
If I can help, as Councillor Still rightly says, in terms of what was resolved, that covers what was finally the conclusion. The input to the debate did include my saying, for instance, I was not willing to accept that we should never go to alternate weekly collections until we've had a proper research into it and reached that conclusion. And I would continue to say to absolutely exclude it without researching whether that is a good idea is bizarre and banal. And perhaps that's what's trying to be captured there.
Can't you just minute that? Is Councillor Beerman's, what he wants to say? Can't you just say Councillor Beerman, da-di-da-di-da? It doesn't mean to say it's come from the rest of us, just from him.
I am actually trying to clarify, even if it's not what we want now, this is a minute of what happened the last meeting. So is there anybody that would object if we put to do so as no research has been done to support, if we deleted that, should remain while it is beneficial to the borough, full stop? Are people happy with that? Because it's not what we feel now, it's what was at the last meeting. Some members felt the weekly bin collection should remain in the Constitution, while others believe that the weekly bin collection should remain while it was beneficial to the borough, full stop. Councillor Baker.
It definitely was raised that no research had been done to support it. Could I suggest that a way of making the sense clearer might be to say some members felt the weekly bin collection should remain specified or something in the Constitution, while others believed the weekly bin collection should only remain while it was beneficial to the borough to do so, as no research had been done to support this. And I think that actually does sum up what the difference in opinion was.
If you've got it written down in front of you, could you just read it out once more, please? That does seem to catch it all.
Yes, some members felt that the weekly bin collection should remain specified in the Constitution or something like that, while others believed should only remain while it was beneficial to the borough to do so, as no research had been done. Well,
Is there
I think
anybody
that
that would
sums
object to that? Because to me that
minimum
does seem to
of
encompass
changes.
what was agreed. Thank
Sorry, I'm
you.
still
Councillor
not-
Beerman,
I'm
carry
sorry.
on.
Two more, but there's they were quick. This analysis of the waste analysis, I'm not quite sure whether. Oh, sorry, this is the next page now, 8, 4A. It says the portfolio holder for environment and climate change will circulate the report. It says here to Project Integra, to all members. I imagine the report from Project Integra, and whether that then means that we're going to get the waste analysis, which was what we were trying to get in more detail. Councillor Nell said it was contained in reports generally, but we wanted it more specifically, if you recall.
I'll ask the officer just to confirm they're happy, yes. Yeah, change has been made. So reports from Project Integra to all members, yes.
And just to clarify, that report will then include these the waste analysis, which was what we were asking for.
That was my belief for the meeting, yes. Because I think that's what this was all about. We wanted to see the waste analysis, how we could improve. Or what, yeah.
Thank you. And one final one, I'm sure there'll be, well, I hope there's no debate about this. This is just the very last sentence where it refers to those councillors wishing not to be associated with the closing of the toilets. But it says, not the toilets, it says in that very last sentence, asked for their vote against the closure of Anchor's Yard, and I'm sure the word toilets should be in there somewhere.
Actually, having the word toilet does clarify it. Yes, it will make a lot more sense. Thank you. Can we have a proposal second for the minute? Councillor Baker.
Thank you, Chairman. Two things, two further things. The first is that although Councillor Day is listed in the members in attendance, I don't believe he was present. No, and I did just have a very quick look in the book to see whether he'd signed in, and I don't believe he had. So could we just update that list? And I'm not sure, I haven't given his apologies tonight, but it's possible because he does work late some evenings. But so he may turn up in a few minutes. But I think it's important to get that correct because he works in the health service, and I'm sure had he been here, he would have declared an interest in that item on the agenda. So, so that update, please. Then, turning to the Project Integra minute. Little 2, halfway down page 8 of 43, well, nearly halfway down, little 2, to approve the Project Integra Constitution, but ensure that the Constitution is transparent. No, that wasn't what the point was about that I raised. The point was that I wanted Project Integra and the way it operates to be transparent, not the Constitution to be transparent. Very different sense. Please can I suggest that that's amended so that it reads to approve the Project Integra Constitution, but to ask that transparency of Project Integra is added to it.
Just confirm,
Yes.
have you got those words? You're okay with that?
And the portfolio holder did agree that was important, and that he was content that that should be added.
Did you want to reread 2.8? Are you okay with it? Just going to read 2.8. Any other comments and points? In which case I ask for a proposal and seconder for the minutes, please. Thank you, Councillor Sherlock. Thank you, Councillor Reid. All those in favour? Thank you. They're passed. We now move into item 8, member and public participation. I have been told that Councillor Harvey wishes to speak on paper B and C. No, I have it in front of me. Thank you. Standing invitation event portfolio holds. Councillor Ossleton is here. Councillor Donnell sends his apologies. He has family issues, which I believe we're aware of. Item 10, referrals from other committees, none. Item 11, issues referred from Cabinet, none. The two meaty ones of the evening are paper B and paper C. I request the committee we take paper C first, as it is a shorter paper, and the officers can actually go home. We'd all like to do. Paper B, I think, will take longer, and we'll just have to stay here and thrash it out. So if we move straight to paper C, so I'll ask the officer to introduce it.
Thank you, Chairman. Evening, councillors. This report is really setting out a view of changing the policy on how we review requests for additional parking in residential areas. So it's looking at how we used to apply the old criteria, which is very comprehensive and very scientific in its approach, perhaps a bit unwieldy. And we're trying to simplify and have a very straightforward 3-stage assessment criteria, which in a way should be fairer for all streets which we're looking at in the future. And I welcome perhaps councillors' views on that. Thank you.
Councillor Baker.
I very much like to ask a question, please, because what What does occur to me is that um, uh, measuring the space available and measuring how much it's used is fine, but I mean, is there any way in which we can get an assessment of what the unmet demand might be in any particular area?
I think it'd be difficult to get figures for unmet demand, but obviously we're responding to requests for additional parking. Simply by observing a site and how many vehicles are parking on a road, we can have a quick assessment as to the scale of the problem. In the past, we have built some schemes, and there have been perhaps people encouraged to bring further vehicles home. There's no telling what the unmet demand is. I'm sorry.
Presumably, if there are cars on grass verges across access drives and double parking and things like that, that gives you one indication. But if everyone is behaving themselves, as it were, and being considerate and parking their car somewhere and walking a mile back to their house, that doesn't show up. So I can see what's in the back of my mind there as to how we have any way of assessing how bad the problem is in any particular area, other than perhaps by inconsiderate parking by those who can't find space on the road.
What we tend to do is carry out surveys. We'll look at the scale of the problem, looking at where other vehicles are parked, be it on the road, be it on verges, be it on footways. We would consider that as being the overall saturation level of the street for parking. That gives a true indication of how many vehicles are required to park in that street. And in certain estates, you'll find that identical roads have very similar problems.
Are there any other general questions? So, Councillor Waldridge. Councillor Waldridge, please.
Chair, I just wonder whether we could hear from the visiting councillor so that he could introduce his thoughts, so we can take those into account, I wonder.
I'll invite the visiting councillor up to the table now. Yes. If you're happy to let the visiting councillor, I believe it would be normal practice for the visiting councillor to go first.
Thank you, Chair. There's a couple of points to make on this particular paper. One of the issues looking at the three stages, and this has been every single different scheme we've ever cooked up in this council, going years ago, has been how do you get, and questions have already started to unpick this, an objective analysis that gives you what is actually happening in a street set against what you can then do about it. And I think the one vital test of any of the processes here has got to be, does your analysis give you a true picture, and is it objective? Because if you can achieve those two things, and I think parts 1 and 2 perhaps get you along that road, the issue then I had was with little 3, and this was the main point I wanted to make to committee, the cost effectiveness of the solution. If a road has a very difficult situation, and it is quite costly to sort out, but nonetheless finds itself at the top of the list, do we then say, because of the cost implications of the process of the point scoring, that it then isn't taken forward because the cost is prohibitive, even though the actual priority is such great in that street? So the balance between 1 and 2 and then 3 becomes really important in if 3 knocks a particular road out of the top 10, the top 20, or however many we can actually physically deal with the resource available, simply on cost, because it is just too expensive. But nonetheless, it might be one of the most important roads in the town or the borough that needs dealing with because of the issues that you've identified in the street. So that's the point I just wanted to raise with members, to think about that point 3, process, not from a cost point of view, but from a process point of view of achieving that objectivity. Because if you don't, then what's the point of doing it? Because you're going to have every councillor under the sun coming and saying, well, my case is this and my case is that, and why is mine more costly and not costly, and so on. It has to be fair to everybody in the way that it's conducted. And that was my point I wanted to make, Chair. Thank you for that.
Thank you. Uh, you are correct. We are looking at process tonight, and it's actually, it should be on the screen behind me, the old and the new process, the proposed systems. I have a list of speakers. Councillor Waldridge.
Thank you, Chair. I have two questions to start with, please. First one, I'd like the officer to explain a little bit more about garages and where they come in here, because I know they were counted under the old system. They were definitely counted as a parking space. And, you know, I know through speaking to one of the officers who works closely on this that, you know, whilst they were counted as spaces, they're quite often not used, and that becomes an issue, you know, if they're filled full of gardening stuff, or some of them have even been converted and you know, since the initial assessment back in 2005 or whenever it was done. So I'd like the officers firstly to explain how that's going to be taken into account, and how do they know if they're being used or not being used. Thanks.
It's the officers to respond on garages.
Using the older system, garages were included. They are part of the parking provision in that street. The proposal here is that we survey each road to pick up the number of parking spaces in that street. That will be the spaces in the street, whether that's garages, whether that's spaces on road, space on verges, such like. And then to do further surveys to pick up where vehicles are parking within that street, so we can get a feel for the level of demand, hopefully the highest demand that's occurring in that street at present. Obviously, as part of that first stage, there is then the comparison between what you actually have currently and what people, the number of people that wish to park in the street. That's the sort of supply-demand equation. From a parking standards perspective, garages are part of that parking standard. So I think we've got to include them in that assessment.
Can I come back, even though it's evident they're not being used, because I know in Brighton Hill there's a lot of unused garages for various reasons, and that is quite often where the problem roads are. And so if we know that the non-use of garages is a contributory factor to parking problems, do they have to be used as a parking standard? I mean, just a question, really.
Clearly, we're not here to debate about whether they should or shouldn't be part of the parking standards. They are part of the parking standard. That's a given. I think we clearly need to undertake these surveys and determine the score for the road based on the system which we've looked at. I think clearly there are some roads, and you're right, I'm aware of many in Brighton Hill myself, where clearly there are blocks of garages which aren't as well used as they could be for parking purposes. And those vehicles do tend to be parked in the street. I'm aware of them. I don't want to commit one way or the other to say yes, garages will or won't be included at this moment in time, but our stance using the old system and proposed to use for the new system is that garages are part of that parking supply.
My second question is, have you actually thought about doing you mentioned about the survey you're doing, but that's somebody going physically into inspecting, from what I can gather. Have you thought of actually doing a proper resident survey, i.e. a questionnaire type survey, because that actually may deal with some of the issues raised by Councillor Baker, actually get an insight into what the households' compositions are and you know, get more of a proper knowledge base of what the issues are here. Sorry.
Yes, the simple answer, and it comes after we've determined the priority of roads. When road A is our first priority and we go to that road and begin to look at implementing solutions in that road, one of the first actions we do is exactly what you're suggesting, a survey of residents, trying to understand the level of number of vehicles they have, how they use them, the type of vehicle, where they park them, what they believe the improvements might be even in their street, save for provide more parking, but they might have another solution which we're not perhaps aware of because of their own particular circumstance. So the answer to the question is yes, we do that survey, but we don't do it now. We've got potentially 300 to 400 roads here to consider. It would be too soon to do it now. It's appropriate to do that when that road is the priority that we're looking at in much more detail.
Well, I understand what you're saying. To do it now would give an absolutely amazing amount of information, but isn't it important to somehow get that information to work out what the priorities are? Because otherwise you just only get in half a picture. And I mean, my view is if we're going to do this, we should be doing it properly, really, and making sure we get the proper system for our, for our borough. Sorry, that's a comment, but just kind of a question as well.
Right, we'll move on to Councillor James.
Picking up on what Carolyn just said, I think that garages should be taken out of the parking standard because quite often garages, people can't afford the garages. And if you look in my ward, the registered social landlords and the cost, so there are many garages that are sitting empty. But we still have a problem with parking, particularly where there's a high density of garages. So I think that is an issue. We need to look at that in this piece of work. And also picking up on the point that she raised about the survey, I think it would be a piece of work that we should do prior or at the same time as looking at this, or before we do this. I think the survey should come first. Because the reality is, if you look at in a road, there could be people on holiday at that time when you're doing that count, or for example in our road or in our wards there are HMOs where at this time when they're letting the HMOs, the house which has 5 bedrooms that could accommodate 2 couples, effectively 14 people, it could be 14 cars. This time round only 2 people have cars, but when it's let 6 months down the line that could change. And so I think it is important to get a flavour of what the issues are, and I think that might come from this. And I think it's quite crude just to do a head count of cars. So one of the other questions I had really was around, you said there's going to be 2 times that you're going to do this, the count. Can you be, in relation to the timing of it, can we make sure that, when will that be done? Because obviously we need to ensure, and it would need to be quite late in the evening, that people are in and settled. Have you got an idea of the sort of time?
Yes, the time on the 2 surveys we're talking about is a overnight survey, a midweek overnight survey. So we're getting, hopefully during the course of the week, again, that worst sort of case scenario, and equally a weekend survey, because clearly people are away from home during the week potentially. They may be at home at the weekend with their vehicle. So we're getting 2 snapshots, if I can use that phrase, of the worst situation, and then depending on what that's showing to us, clearly we'll use the figure which is higher. It's quite in terms of when during the year. Clearly we're going to avoid times when it's during holiday periods, for example. We'll try to have a normal week, whatever a normal week is, but a time when people aren't perhaps away on their holidays, generally speaking, that sort of thing.
Picking up on the point that Paul said, in relation to stage 3 of this proposed 3-stage, could you explain to me more about the costings and how that will inform the decision on which roads go forward?
If I can refer you to Appendix 2, which I think is the last page of the document, the very, very last line on the page obviously explains how it's proposed to rank the sites once we've undertaken this assessment. Effectively, for each road, there will be 3 scores. The first one, supply demand, the second, deliverability, and the third one, cost effectiveness. The reason for including a cost effective section in there, if in the probably the very unlikely situation that you had 2 roads that had an identical supply and demand figure and had an identical deliverability score, you could then say this road here is good value for money, this road here is less or poor value for money, and on that basis our priority should be to do the one where we've got good value for money first, and the less good value for money be the follow-up scheme.
In relation to the piece of work that you're going to undertake, will this come back to this committee before it goes off for implementation, or is this it, or do we get to see the outcomes of that piece of work and the assessments that have been done? So say you then say, I don't know, Queen Mary Avenue against whatever road, and Queen Mary Avenue is going to be more costly, but so we think we're going to do this one. Will we get to see that assessment and, in the outcome of the whole piece of work that you're going to do before it is then implemented?
Perhaps I can answer that one, because Richard's thinking about another part of the report, I think. We would approach it as we did the first programme, which would be, once we have an identified and approved set of criteria, which is effectively Appendix 2, amended in the light of comments made at this committee, and then presented to the portfolio holder. So what we want to do is get formal approval to the assessment process. We would then, as officers, objectively apply that assessment process and then submit a report to the portfolio holder on the results of that process. So that report will go through the normal consultation process. Members will be able to see how roads have been assessed. There'll be the full list there, and can make comment on that at the time. We hadn't intended, and I don't think it's necessary, quite frankly, to bring back a piece of officer work which I hope will be objectively undertaken against the criteria. If members have concern about the way we've applied it, then obviously we can react to that and hopefully justify our position. Perhaps I could just also make a comment in relation to one of the earlier points about consultation. Obviously the committee will want to debate that, but I think this comment might be useful in that context. We need to remember that we'll be undertaking surveys of 300 to 400 roads, and my personal view is that to undertake consultation with the residents on those 300 to 400 roads at the beginning of the process is A, disproportionate, B, a waste of officer time, and C, raising expectations of a lot of residents who may be number 300 or 400 on that list. There is no point consulting with residents who are on that list at that level. Now, you may decide that in fact a consultation should key in maybe the top 20 or whatever else, but I really would strongly recommend against an approach that involves consultation on every road at an early stage, because, as I say, I just think it would be disproportionate at this point in time.
Okay, so James wanted to come back, then
Yeah,
Councillor Bierman wanted to come in.
We weren't asked for consultation. What we were saying is it would be a survey, so it may be quite crude, and you may be just saying, how many cars do you have? How many people, or how many are you likely to have? You're not actually saying. What you're saying is we're doing a survey around why we're doing it. You're not actually committing to anything, but it's just, I don't think it's useful information that we can keep as a record, and it's just a survey, really. So in relation to my house, I would get the survey and I would say we have 4 cars. And then you have an indication of how many cars belong to that house.
Right. Councillor Bierman, was it on this point?
Well, I was only going to make a passing comment on that point, but
Please carry on.
which was I fully understand the logic of what Mr. Bosk is saying, and basically I think that's right. I mean, if one can gather further information that helps to inform one, simply and cheaply, that's fine. But my biggest fear would be raising expectations. I think that's a terrible danger. I'm also concerned about this topic of garages. I think there are garages and garages, and by that I mean there's privately owned garages as part of households, and there's garages that are rentable garages, and I think they are two quite different things. I certainly take the point that if there's a garage that's rentable that people can't afford to rent, that shouldn't be included. Certainly, if one has a private residence and a garage and it's not being used because you choose to stick your garden tools in it, that's your problem. And that you shouldn't make the rest of the streets suffer as a result, and it should be included as part of the available parking spaces, would be my rather harsh judgment. In a way which leads me on to sort of saying, I think we've created potentially so many new problems on some of our recently built developments. The chances of us catching up on this issue makes me totally lose the will to live. I mean, I just think of a prestige development like Taylor's Farm that's already got mega problems. Some of it because of indiscipline, because people don't park in the spaces they've got, but also a genuine abundance of cars in an area where there isn't adequate according to the standards that we now have, but obviously different at the time. And whilst we are not in a position, sorry Mr Bennett, to properly enforce some of our parking in the outlying areas, and particularly around schools, I think we're going to be banging our head against a wall for a long time. And as I say, I despair really, which isn't a very constructive contribution, but it's the fact.
Well, I welcome some of those comments, not in totality, but that's why we're here tonight, to simplify. We have two papers to hopefully improve both points. Councillor Washbourne.
Thank you. I want to just pick up on Councillor Bierman's point about the newer residential developments. On page 37 of 43, 6.1.2, it talks about the current prioritised programme and any new roads. I mean, what age roads are we talking about in this? And also, as a comment, should we not be placing priority on our older sites? I mean, obviously we are allowing these new estates to be built with inadequate parking, so I feel that we should be prioritising our older sites.
Can I come in here, please? The old parking standards, that, depending on your view, has caused or hasn't caused us issues, is not to do with this. What we are now proposing, if we look at the proposed stuff that's on the screen, is to actually look at what is needed. So the parking standards is a historical thing that you can have your varying different views on it. This is to try and sort out what is most important, where we should spend our time and effort as a priority. That's what we're trying to sort out.
Chair, perhaps I could make one comment. I think the point was made earlier that the process has to be objective, it has to be transparent, it has to be easily understood. Absolutely. I think if we were to bring in the age of a development, I begin to doubt the objectivity of a system that does that. I think what we need to look at primarily is the intensity of the problem that's been experienced, whether the development was from the 60s, whether it was from the 70s, or indeed whether it was built last year. The issue is, what's the intensity of the problem? And I think if we start to try and band our estates into different ages, which may not actually represent the intensity of the problem, I think, from my perspective, would be the wrong way to go. But
Councillor Baker.
Thank you, Chair. Just to return to the issue of garages, yes, I think it's right that garages are counted in the assessment. I think then there is an issue where a road comes up high in appearing to have a lot of unmet demand. If it's of a design, the area is of a design which has garages in blocks, which are rented from, for instance, the housing association, then I think there needs to be a small additional piece of work in contacting the owners of the garage blocks and discovering how many of them are empty or in alternative use, because certainly the housing associations at one time, when they had a lot of surplus, a lot of empty garages, were encouraging people to use them as storage and to use them as to run a small business from. So, and I think that's an additional small piece of information that is needed to assess, to enable a clearer picture of what measures might be needed in that particular area. And I've got another point then I'd like to make.
Again, Councillor Baker, that is something we do as and when we look into that road in more detail. Once that road has received a priority, we do have that conversation with the housing association. One of the solutions we consider is, can we make use of the space which the garages are taking up? Perhaps remove the garages and put a parking space back. So we do actually consider that.
The second point, so yes, I'm pleased to hear that. The second point I was going to make was, when you look at the comparison between the 3-stage approach that's being proposed and the previous 5-stage approach, essentially, I mean, stage 1 and stage 2 of the old process is effectively stage 1 of the new process. Then stage 4 of the old process is deliverability, which is now stage 2. And stage 5 was cost effectiveness, and that's now stage 3. So effectively the difference between the two is that the work in stage 3 of the old process is now dropped. And first of all, I would just say, is that correct?
Not totally, because the new process also takes away this issue about parking standards. We're making, as part of the new process, we're not proposing to discuss, entertain parking standards. We're simply looking at the current supply and the current demand.
Thank you, I've missed that. Thank you very much, Mr. Wareham. But stage 3 is omitted. The work in stage 3.
Yes.
The only element of that bothers me is the access issues, and I really would like, if there are, I mean, I would hope that if there are roads where the refuse freighter is regularly having problems, or if the emergency services are reporting to us that they have problems, I tend to regard that a fire engine usually will get through somehow, wherever it needs to get to. But I'm slightly more concerned about ambulances, who tend to be much more cautious about trying to force a way through a narrow gap. And I would hope that somehow we could pick up, if we are hearing concern from the emergency services, that there are areas, there are roads where they find they are obstructed by parking. So is there a way that's picked up?
I'll ask Richard just to add a comment.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, we will certainly pick up on the access issues, be it bus service or fire service, whatever. And that's the thing we would look at normally. We'd get regular complaints about parking issues in respect of parking control, yellow line type request. So we are aware that's an issue coming up. So we would log that.
So that then, does that tie in with this piece of work? Because it would seem to me that it ought to, and I'm not clear that it does.
Taking you back to the current criteria. There's 300 and nearly 400 roads on that list. When that criteria is objectively applied, we made contact with the 3 emergency services, the bus service and the refuse service, so effectively 5 different services, to understand from them the extent of the obstruction they were facing. My recollection is, can't be precise, my recollection is, of those 400-ish roads, we had no more than a handful identified as being problems by those 5 services, which, whether that is how they understand the problem, I don't know, but clearly that was a frustrating lack of response, dare I say it, because I cannot believe that just 5 or 6 roads in our borough suffer access problems. Certainly the response we got from the fire was probably the most positive one, in that they would say, we will get to the problem, whatever. The ambulance service, the police service, from memory, I might be doing the police a disservice, I don't recall any roads being identified by the police as being a problem road for them. The bus services, there were some, I can recall that, and certainly the refuse freighter, where they had regular repeat problems where they couldn't access a road because they were constrained by parked vehicles. The reason for excluding it from the proposed criteria was that we weren't really getting the good enough data to allow us to do anything with it. I think if a road is identified to us by residents as having a parking problem, or by a council as having a parking problem, the best thing we can go out is to make our own judgment about that problem, and we do that by seeing it as part of the surveys that we're proposing to conduct, and we can see it when we do that assessment of that site in much more detail.
Paula, you wanted to come back?
Yeah, so what I'm trying to get my head round is in the future, so the roads we have on the current list, we've actually asked them proactively, are you having problems on these roads? But what I'm trying to get my head around is in the future, if the ambulance service has difficulty getting access in a particular location, is there a mechanism by which they're notifying us of that, could flag a road up to be inspected under our parking, new parking proposals?
There is currently no formal mechanism, but that's something we can certainly take back to the emergency services, to the other services I mentioned, and ask that very question: can we establish that mechanism? And say there is no formal mechanism, but there's nothing to stop them contacting us at this moment if they have a particular problem currently. We perhaps need to give some thought to whether there is some score we can add to the proposal, which perhaps might mean that road jumps ahead of another road because the emergency service identified it as being a problem.
Councillor James.
Thank you. I want to speak on the point that Viv talked about, which is about new development. We've got 354, as I see it, roads that are still in the scheme, been possibly in the scheme for 6 years. We're now building new development with a lesser standard, which is causing a major problem. An example, Marnell Park, which is a new development in Popley, which is horrendous, and they're looking at Kiln Farm accessing through Marnell Park, and everybody has grave concerns about that. Now, we gave planning permission to that site, and there were concerns from the residents and from the community to say that that would cause problems. Now, we've had all these people waiting on the list for their roads to be done, but we're allowing poor development to happen. Our local plan isn't addressing it. Our local plan is the same, and the standard is still as is. And we could therefore, for example, next week we could see Eli Lilly coming forward with a lesser parking standard than is required, but because it's such a problem, it could jump to the ahead, because some of these are so bad, and Marnell Park is one of those. And I guess when you look at this scheme, if you take in newer schemes, Marnell Park will be there. And as a development, there's lots of roads in Marnell Park, so it could new development could eat up our funding. And I think we need to look at it, and I think that we need to make a recommendation from this committee to P&I that they look at the parking standards and consider this in relation to the standards. Then we do need them to have a look at this, and I think that we need to refer this back as well to them to consider this issue. So that's what the one.
That's a relevant point, not perhaps this committee, but we'll ask the officer to
No,
record it.
What it says on the agenda, if I could just remind you, it says, it asks us referrals from other committees or to the council. There's none to this council at the moment, but I have referred from committees to other committees issues. And if we're having something referred to us on private sector housing that came from P&I, so we can, because this is a planning issue, and it might not be. And this is something we're looking at now, but what we need to ensure is in the future, planning are looking at this in relation to future development, because otherwise all we're doing is building housing and then we're causing more problems, and we need to consider parking. And if you look at the parking standards as part of P&I and as part of the local plan, we're not. So I'd ask that, and it's been seconded, so maybe the first thing
Right, can we just stop? The point's been made about new housing developments not having sufficient parking spaces or the potential for it. I believe you've got everybody will be, is anybody against that? I think everybody's basically, Councillor Still.
We all had the opportunity, members sat around this table, to vote for a motion at full council to keep the housing numbers down to 594. I think probably I was the only one around the table that voted for that. What I'm trying to say is, what Councillor James is saying is absolutely right and correct, but the way we can help with our parking problems, in my view, is to keep the housing numbers down as low as possible. Here we are looking at 748. I find it crazy, we mention in here, and on page 38 of 43, later on, when the methodology goes forward and it's agreed, you're going to be looking at Sherfield Park and Beggarwood. Well, you know, surely the developers have got a big part to play in this, and there's no way that we as the local authority can, there's no way we can say to them, right, every house, 2-bedroom house, needs 4 parking spaces, or 2 parking spaces, because mainly people will have a car each. I mean, you know, here we are sat around here discussing the parking problems we've got now in this borough. What are we going to be doing? I won't be here in 15 years' time, but around this table, I mean, hopefully I'll be still living. You know, they'll all be discussing, the new development on Razors Farm, the new development on Manydown. What we're going to do about the parking issues. It's just history repeating itself.
From the chair, the point has been made about new development. I don't believe there's anybody here who actually feels strongly against it.
What else, Chair, is...
We are moving away from parking standards. The paper in front of us tonight, be very clear, is not about parking standards. It's not about new build.
No, I know it's not. That's what I'm saying.
Where the greatest need is, and us addressing it and having a
I know it's not about parking standards, but the implications of having a standard that isn't meeting need is that we're now, as a result of that, going to be
Councillor James, I'm sorry, that is not for this committee.
No.
We have fought against parking standards.
What I'm saying is you're going to allow, the officer's recommendation is that we have new development now that we will consider as part of this. And what Tim is saying is it's purely on which is the most pressing need. And it could be one of our new developments that was built last year. And what I'm saying is we need to make a recommendation, and I've recommended that we ask P&I to look at this because we have a limited budget.
Councillor James, I think you've missed the point. You have proposed that. It has been seconded by Councillor Waldridge. I did ask from the chair 5 minutes ago if anybody wants to speak against it. Nobody spoke against it, so therefore, therefore it is now this committee's wish that that goes forward. So your wish was it went to P&I, so therefore that is a recommendation from this committee. New bill, but it's not a new thing. This has been going on for years and years. Anyway, that is that issue resolved. The next speaker was Councillor Waldridge.
Thank you, Chair. Actually, I want to reiterate really what Councillor Baker said. I suppose I'll just encapsulate it. Does the officer not see it as a concern that those issues, road safety, access, environmental issues, don't seem now in this current criteria assessment, the new one, to be encapsulated in a formal way? Because that is a concern to me if that is the case. I cannot see, from what I've heard tonight, how that is going to be encapsulated. So if we could just have a...
I'll ask the officer
Thank you.
to do a quick response.
The proposed criteria clearly is trying to target the resources of this council to roads where there is the greatest need, and that need, we believe the way to measure that need is obviously this issue about considering supply against demand. Yes, emergency access is an issue in some roads, and I think I've already mentioned it to Mrs. Baker that I would perhaps take out of tonight's meeting that we need to just give some thought to how we might include that within the criteria, but be mindful of the previous lack of comment we've got from some of the emergency services. So yes, I'll certainly take that away from tonight's meeting.
Do you think maybe, I appreciate that it's a while since the initial service, criteria was set 5 or 6 years or whatever it was, or probably more than that, but maybe there would be a case for have more proactive links with the emergency services to remind them of the need to report in regularly about issues like this. And I don't know if that does, I'm sure it is, but maybe that's why we haven't had any current or recent contact from them. I know you said at the start that there was some, but I mean, my concern is that if there are 5 or 6 that you mentioned aren't even going to be included, now.
Councillor Waldridge,
Yeah.
They will, so for what I understood from the officer said, and please correct me if I'm wrong, when the road comes close to the top and the surveys are done, a lot of this will then be picked up, especially because the local council should be involved and the local council should know. So as far as I can see, with this proposed criteria, it will get picked up, but later on, and we don't raise the hopes of residents for something that's not going to happen.
But those stage 3 might not get into the top 20 if those things aren't picked up. Those road safety access issues, the fact that there may be sort of elderly people living on that estate.
Point made. I'll ask the officer to respond.
As part of the survey, clearly we're able to identify where the vehicles are parked in the street. That's part of stage 1, is to undertake those surveys. Obviously, from those surveys, we as officers can use our experience to determine whether access is denied to that street. We know whether vehicles can get into a street based on what we see on a plan, and equally on the ground as well. So I can't give you a commitment at this moment in time that we will or we won't. I said I'll go away and look at it in terms of whether we can consider access as more formally within this process, and that clearly will be in my report, which I present to the cabinet member in due course on this topic. In terms of the question you asked about closer liaison, better communication with the emergency services, clearly that's somewhere where perhaps we could get better at, certainly, and again, that's something I'll take away from tonight's meeting.
Councillors, the officers made several points here. If I ask them to read them out, and if people disagree, please can you comment, not rather than if you agree.
I've got the unenviable task of trying to summarise some of those comments into a resolution that we're all happy with. Right, there was... does the committee wish to see one of the priority assessment criteria to be the age of the neighbourhood in which the parking problems occur? We need a resolution on that issue. There was a discussion about, there was no resolution, there were points made on either side, but is the view of the committee that the age of the neighbourhood, and I think the point is made, and therefore the length over which the parking problem has been experienced, is that a relevant consideration in
Those
assessing?
for that becoming a relevant consideration, please raise your hands. 1, 2, 5. Is it 5?
Yep.
Those against? Sorry, those against the age of it being a relevant consideration? Well, I don't think it is, but it's 5-4, so that is actually part of the... Okay.
I think a comment was also made, which I think will be endorsed, is that the timing of the parking count is important in relation both to the time of day it's undertaken and the time of the year in relation to holiday periods. So I think if a comment from the committee for officers to bear that in mind.
Yep.
This again may have general support that emergency service access and road safety issues should be included in the formal assessment process.
Agreed.
I'll cover it for the sake of form. I think that the recommendation from the committee is to refer to Planning and Infrastructure Overview and Scrutiny Committee the issue of current parking standards and the parking problems that can arise. Yeah.
In which case, sorry, have more.
Yeah.
Keep going, please.
That questionnaires of residents should be undertaken to better understand the nature of the parking problem. I think as a principle, that probably has committee endorsement. You'll gather from my comments earlier that I think it's the issue of when those questionnaires are undertaken. Officers have, I think, made the view that those questionnaires should be limited as part and undertaken as part once the sieving process has been undertaken, rather than a wholesale questionnaire of all residential properties on the 400 plus roads. But a committee view will need to be taken on that we can pass on to the portfolio holder.
I believe we're erring on the side of only those in the top few actually get the survey work done. Is that committee agreement?
My own view is that it can be done in such a way where it's not raising expectations. It's very factual, and making it clear that please don't have any expectations here. This is a general thing that's going out to people, just as a fact-finding mission. That's my personal view.
Councillor Reid.
I can see Councillor Waldridge's point on that, but I am a little bit concerned that we might be taking up a lot of officer time in this. If we survey every road, and we're talking about hundreds and hundreds of roads, I'm just concerned that we're adding to what is already quite a large burden of work to do this. So I have reservations on that.
Councillor James.
I don't think it has to be onerous, the task. I think it's a very simple survey, and then it's about collating that. And I'm not sure that this team needs to collate that. It could be another team that collates that information. But I think it then could inform future budget. It may be that it identifies things that would say that we then need to have further budget, and it may be a much bigger problem than we think it is. And I just think there's also perception, and where we see a road that is over, which is a real problem, maybe it's not to that community, or maybe it's for another reason, and it could help us in determining this assessment criteria and how we move forward.
The officer would like to say a few words.
Sorry, at the risk of repeating myself, and as the head of service who have overall responsibility for this, I really do doubt the value of undertaking a survey of all the residential roads that could be included. I do not believe we would find the information from residents on the roads 350 to 400 of any real use, to be quite frank. I believe that the objective parking surveys, which will show an updated indication of supply and demand, will be, if anything's of value in justifying further allocations of resources to this, it's that issue and that issue alone. Not, I believe, comments from residents about the number of cars they have or maybe thinking of having, and whether they're using their garages or not. That won't affect how we're allocating the likely allocation of resources over the medium-term financial strategy. We're talking of a large amount of money, but when you look at the expenditure per space, we have to be realistic. It'll take several years to get through the top 10, 15 or 20 schemes. And I think extending any form of questionnaire or survey realistically beyond perhaps, say, the top 50, I honestly think is, to be frank, a waste of time.
I put it from the chair. Those in favour of going with the officer's recommendation for only surveying the top few, please show. I will leave that with the officers at the time, because they will know far more detail than we do when it gets there. No, I don't think the 50 should be used. That was a suggestion. I am proposing that we leave the decision with the officers to survey when they think the survey results will be helpful. Okay, I'll change that to survey when the survey results will be helpful. Those against? 3 versus the rest. So you have that's carried. Thank you. Next point.
And the next point was in relation to garages, whether they should be included within the assessment and whether they shouldn't, and if they should, then is that all garages or just those on curtilage, and whether those should be excluded in garage courts or are rentable. So it would be interesting to understand the committee's view. I'm afraid there's a few issues there. Perhaps the first one is should garages be included in the assessment at all?
Could you, if I got this feeling right from the committee, individual private garages is generally agreed yes. When they're grouped and rented separately to the property, there was other feelings. And I think that is still the feelings of the committee.
That's private ones as well as socially rented ones, yeah.
So where the garage is integral to the property, that is counted as a garage. That is a private thing. But where they are rented separately to the property, or where they are grouped together, I think that perhaps is looking at it differently. But again, the officer's already stated that will come up when the final survey. So is that clear, or?
Yes, I think so. Yes, we'll include that as a committee.
James?
One of the solutions in relation to deliverability may be that we ask the housing association to drop their charges in that particular area where there's a problem. That could be a real cheap solution for you.
Presumably they'd have to put the rents up to cover, because they're not allowed to run at a loss, but that's a separate issue. Carry on with the officer's report.
I haven't got any further issues to raise from the debate.
Right, councillors, we have had the officer's paper and questioning. Are there any burning debate points? I think we have actually debated it as we've gone. If we look at page 35 of 43, we have done 21A and we've done 21B. So thank you very much. That is paper C completed. Councillor, we move on to paper B, page 10 of 43, and Richard will introduce it. Sorry, Councillor, the officer will introduce it.
Thank you, Chair. Parking fees and charges is an extremely complex issue. I've learnt it myself over the last year or so. Hence, to assist the committee, this paper has been split into two sections. Section A talks about council-owned fee-paying car parks, and Section B talks about residence permit schemes, generally in residence areas. The report seeks the committee's comments on various proposed policy principles associated with these two areas. I need to emphasise that the proposed policy principles are not aimed at increasing parking income. Instead, they're aimed at setting a more robust, fair and transparent approach to setting fees and charges going forward. Additionally, the proposed policy principles seek to align the Council's approach to setting its fees and charges and its day-to-day operational management with recognised industry good practice wherever this is possible. To assist the committee, I've produced a series of slides setting out the issues and proposed policy principles. These are replicated from the report. And Chair, can I suggest that these perhaps be taken one by one to ensure that we capture the comments of the committees to each of the policy principles?
So the proposal is, when we go through paper B, we take it bit by bit and we questions and discussion on it, and it will come up on the screen as well to help us. Councillor Baker.
Sorry.
Thank you, Chairman. The one general point that I think applies to the whole paper is that I was quite disappointed that there is no attempt to make any comment about what the environmental impacts might be. And I think on car parking overall, that's I think a missed opportunity, because yes, there are environmental impacts as to whether what our approach to car parking should be, and whether it should be whether it should be taken into account of whether it encourages people to use cars more or to use public transport or other modes of transport more. So I was disappointed that there was no reference at all in the paper to it.
Did the officer wish to respond to that? Councillor Beerman, I believe, to speak.
Whether or not the officer wishes to respond, I think is a very valid point, and I share the thought that, in fact, I wanted to go wider and say, though the report very thoroughly introduces the question of having a strategy to see what one's seeking to achieve in the sundry car parks, unless I'm not reading it properly, I don't see it there. I thought it would lead on to say, well, this particular car park we want to make cheap so that people will visit the Anvil or whatever. This one we want to make expensive because it contributes to congestion, etc., etc. And that sort of strategic overview doesn't seem to be there. I'm not knocking some of the ideas that are contained in the different, what are they called, issue headings. But I don't think that overall explanation of which car park is serving which particular purpose is complete. That's first point. Second one is in 3.5, and in a way again this is linked with the environmental thing, and the fact that we are allegedly broke at the moment. I can't see under 3.5 why we're saying it's not aimed to increase car park income. I don't have a problem with getting income from car parking. I think there's a case to be made for doing that, because a service is being provided, it is a cost to the environment, etc., etc. Why is it down as a thing that we're not intending to do it? I know that some publicity in the media said, oh, terrible, you're making money from speeding fines, you're making money from this and the other. In many cases there's lots of costs, and we're not even covering our costs, and as is made clear in this report, in some cases we aren't even doing that. That's a very minimum we should be doing. We should be thinking about whether a car park could be used for other purposes, say another John Lewis or something like that, and be getting us a heap more income. So we're already doing some sort of subsidy by providing the car parks in the first place. And then lastly, just on this sort of general introduction, it was a question, 5.1, I wasn't quite sure whether it was saying 31 of the town's total car parking capacity, whether that is public car parking capacity or parking capacity including, say, the large businesses that have their own car parks in the town centre.
Thank you, Councillor Beam, for that comment about 5.1. It's just to clarify, it's the town centre, total town centre car parking, so the public car parking. The parking provided by the council, by Festival Place, by Network Rail, such like.
If I come back to the officer, did you want to actually move on to a particular point and we'll debate it?
I'm happy to, Chair.
My apologies. Thank you for reminding me. Would the visiting councillor like to come to the table?
Thank you, Chair. I think if I make a contribution now, it would help you in terms of, I think, your deliberations, if that's okay. As a councillor with Councillor James who represents a town centre ward, I think these issues are very, very pertinent to our residents and our constituents, and I think the issues I'm going to talk to you now about relate to that quite importantly. One of the issues to do with the first part of the paper, and I think needs to be borne in mind, is what's the purpose of this? I appreciate what the officer said about money making and about income making, but is this about a service that we're providing to people? And then the wider economic implications of some of this in the town centre. Now, in particular, I'm thinking of town centre businesses whose owners and employees have to park in the town centre and pay every single day to park in the town centre in order that they can go to work. Now, that is an issue that isn't been picked up, but is very relevant to a number of the smaller businesses in the town centre. And I'm thinking of those that have got absolutely no access of their own to parking at all, because their businesses are slap bang in the middle of the high street, so they're never going to have access to parking on their own premises. That is an issue that needs to be borne in mind if we're going to talk about economic vitality in the top of town in particular. The other point is also incentivising shoppers. You know, why don't we have a Christmas free day? A particular point in the calendar where you would want to encourage people to come into the town centre to do their business. You know, the town centre car parks are an impediment to some people because of cost. So are there issues there that we can address with particular incentives associated with particular points in the shopping calendar that would really help the retailers in the top of town, and in particular, again, I'm thinking of the smaller businesses. The town centre car parks are still on the SHLA and in the local plan for development, and that square has not been circled yet. There is no idea and no statement that has been made by the landowner to be absolutely clear what the intention is for the town centre car parks, quite a number of them. Yet they are still in the plan with yields of housing associated with them. And I think that's still an issue. And if this paper is going to come forward and deal with some of these points, then we just need to understand the strategic function, yes, but the strategic reality of what those sites are going to be for in the future. When it comes to commuter parking, and this is relating directly to our ward and the experience on the other paper, in terms of commuter parking, I think the balance between the on-street regime and the car parking regime is really important. Do you get the car parking regime right so that you take the commuters off our residential streets, or do you create it so onerous so that they are forced onto our residential streets? And then the only solution you wind up with is residence parking. And why would residents in some streets have to have residence parking when it's the only solution that's open to them? Why are we forcing them down that? There needs to be a real balance and a real understanding in the role that town centre car parks can play in dealing with the commuter parking problem. And when we've introduced residence parking, because in some ways it works, in some places it doesn't, and officers know this, you simply move it on, you move it on, and you move it on. And you move it out wider and wider and wider around the town centre. So the making of a service, and it is a service, this isn't just a process of making money or issuing permits, it's a service to residents. Making that affordable for the residents of the borough on a permit basis is really important. Dealing with the commuter issue so that you actually, in effect, how do you create good neighbourhoods? That's the final point I want to leave you with, Chair. How do we actually create good neighbourhoods surrounding our town centre where parking is not a daily battle of going out and remonstrating with a commuter for what the hell are you doing parking out the front of my home, because I ain't going to get to park there in an hour's time, or when I come back from where. That kind of issue, that real intense ASB issue, which is genuine, needs to be tackled in this policy and all these principles if we're going to deal with it seriously. Because at the moment, the two don't marry up easily, and that leaves Martin's officers in a really difficult position when they're walking around the trying to deal with enforcement, because they're getting in the ear from residents of why is this that and why is it the other. There needs to be, I think, a bit more coherence to this than is at the moment. It's moving in that direction, but I don't think the policy at the moment and some of the principles is coherent enough maybe to meet some of those objectives, but it's getting there slowly.
Thank you. I'll pass the officer.
Chair, if I could just comment on one of the points made by Councillor Harvey. He mentioned, I think you touched on Christmas free or something. You said, I didn't quite catch it in full, but certainly on one of the policy principles we're proposing. One of the comments we're making, A9 on page 15 of 43. We are actually seeking the committee's views on officers investigating charging initiatives that are aimed at encouraging greater use of town centre car parking. Now, the kind of thing that's going through our minds, certainly as officers, is perhaps, as you say, a day where car parking is free, whether that's on the run up to a particular period like Christmas, or whether it's one day a week, market day. There's a whole host of things. Of course, and so we are seeking your comments on whether we should investigate that further, and clearly if so, we will do that investigation and bring any thoughts back if that's perhaps a view of the council committee here.
I think that's really important, and one of the things I've picked up from talking to some of the town centre smaller shop owners is the relationship they have with the council, either through the Traders Association that doesn't always represent them, not all of them, and certainly not some of the smaller shops, and their need to know what's going on so they can plan their retail aspect around this. And that top of town bit, I think, is really important, because at the moment they're the ones, I think, who are struggling the most to stay afloat at the moment, and we see that with the empty shops. So that sort of relationship, Richard, is really important, but I think you're going to have to really reach out to them to get a true picture of when it would perhaps be best for them, if you were going to go down that road to do, I don't know, 2 days before Christmas you do, you know, it's Christmas shopping, that sort of thing, that you really do generate people footfall in the town centre.
We're open to any general questions to the officer regarding the paper, and then we'll take it specific. Yes, we will. Right, in which case we'll go through each one. Right. Page 10 of 43 is the recommendations that we've got to bear in mind when we're going through this. If we start at 7.2.1, it's actually on the screen in front of you now. Strategic function of each of the council's car park has not been defined. You've got commentary, alternatives and proposed policies on the paper in front of you. Councillor Mr James.
My only question in relation to this, and it's been picked up by Councillor Harvey, is that a lot of those car parks which are in the map provided and council owned are in the SHLA for development with a yield, and how will that impact on this strategy? And it has a timescale, so we do need to be minded of that in relation to that. So when the local plan is voted on next week, that's going to say that those sites could come forward for development.
Would the officer like to comment on this? Bear in mind this is only principles we're looking at tonight.
I'm not, in all honesty, sure how they influence how the SHLA comment impacts on the strategy. Clearly, we have this number of spaces within the town and this number of car parks within the town. I don't actually have an answer for him, Councillor James. I'm not sure how it does, in all honesty. Whilst they continue to be car parks, I would hope we would be able to continue to apply these, or certainly very similar, policy principles to those car parks if a decision was taken that those spaces were available for development. Then clearly we would need to look at and think very carefully about how, one, whether we need to replace those spaces, and secondly, where we might look to replace those spaces. I'm not sure how it fits directly to this whole thing about setting an approach to fees and charges.
Can we look at the screen and go through what's on the screen? So, Councillor Baker.
I think it's a good idea to identify clearly which are intended as short stay car parks and which are long stay car parks. I think that's helpful when people who don't know the town well come into the town. They have an idea of how long they want to stay, and that helps them find their way to an appropriate car park. So I support that principle.
Thank you. Was it Councillor Bierman?
Please, yeah. I'm not quite understanding, as I say, though the colour plan, which is rather better than the one in the report, because you can actually understand what it's trying to achieve, is useful in explaining. And I have to say, I haven't counter-checked these, what is intended. I don't know whether that's a change from what they're doing now. They're not, right. So we're not explaining why particular ones have been chosen to be short stay and particular ones to be longer stay. That's the first thing, then I'll come back on another.
If I can try and perhaps add a bit more commentary. I mean, clearly there is no difference from the current arrangements in a sec. What we're seeking here is for the committee to endorse that approach that we've taken up until now, and hopefully continue to take in future. The reason for setting it out is because clearly your shorter stay car parks, you may have a slightly different pricing regime for your shorter stay car parks to encourage people to use the town, as Councillor Harvey had mentioned, about perhaps it generating, encouraging perhaps greater economic viability in the town. Whereas your longer stay car parks, you might be looking for those to be the spaces whereby your commuters, your shop workers park, and they are perhaps slightly further away from the central town area, not hugely in our case, but slightly further away. So that's why we are just trying to identify those three different types of car park. You'll note, of course, in there, car park number 7, which is a sort of orange amber colour, that's actually a 30-minute car park, purely for 30 minutes, very, very short stay users, perhaps people who are going to the bank or nip into the market, that kind of thing. Clearly you want that to be as close to the town as you can, and that's why that particular car park has been selected. But that's all we're doing here, is really trying to seek endorsement for an approach we're currently already taking.
Does that mean to say you're not seeking for our comments, saying, well, for instance, I mean, I can see the logic. If you want a McDonald's, whether that's a good idea or not, you might be able to shove one down yourself and back out in the car in that time, and save queuing in the drive-through. But for instance, one might argue that car park 5 is in a similarly close proximity, and I'm not arguing particularly it should be a 30-minute, but I think there's a case for considering that as a 30-minute in the same way as 7.
Councillors, I'd happily receive comments you have in that regard. If we feel we've got it wrong, then please do let us know.
It's terribly subjective, and I don't have enough evidence, real evidence, to say that is wrong. But I would suggest that if the criteria is accessibility for quick and nipping into the bank, certainly I'll declare an interest. I use the Nationwide, although I normally go on my bike. But if I were in the car, I would probably prefer to park in 5 because it's very well placed for that. And I'd also like other people who are there excessively long to be shifted out as soon as possible so that I can get in and do my quickie.
Visiting councillor, yes, please.
No, forgive me. I should have said this at the top of the meeting. Because as councillors, we are in receipt of a parking permit that enables us to park in these car parks. We do actually have a pecuniary interest, so I should declare that I have a pecuniary interest relating to my role as a councillor.
Ditto for all councillors. However, to clarify, it's only if we're on business. So if we're on council business, I'm not sure how that stands.
Sorry, Chair. Okay, well, I include myself very, very occasionally in that as well. Okay, so for the moment, I really don't want to put a case. I mean, now I can see the colours and the coding and the meaning. I'm sort of feel I'm better informed, and I might want to come back in 6 months' time and say something else, because I don't get the impression we're being specifically asked to input on that aspect of things. But as I say, I think there is a case for 5, just a superficial first impression. The next thing is, I'm sure I'm going to be told there are mega cost implications, because I'm sure there are. If I, as I do for instance, occasionally go to Winchester, and there used to be a system in Winchester in the multi-storey by the castle, where you could park and you paid on exit, dependent how long you were there. Now the beauty of that is you do your business, and we're talking about economic vitality, you do your shopping and you shop until you drop, if you don't need to worry about your car parking. But if you've decided, oh, I only want to buy a few things and I'm therefore only going to stay here for an hour, you will go back and, sure as anything, go back and finish your shopping in an hour, and you won't go to the coffee shop or whatever else you might do if you can be more relaxed about the parking. And I think the pay in advance is a deterrent from people using the town centre in a relaxed fashion, which is part of what we're saying we want to do. but I suspect all the mechanics of changing that wouldn't be cheap. But I also think it's fairer, I have to say, in passing.
I think the officer would like to come in.
Yes, I mean, pay on exit is dare I say, a more recent system that's perhaps been coming into play more and more. It's something which certainly we want to look at, but I think again, for the purpose of this paper tonight, we're not here to discuss whether we should be looking at a pay on exit or pay and display system that we currently have. Obviously, what we're trying to establish is the principles, and the principles would apply irrespective of the type of payment system we chose to adopt as a council. Yes, Councillor Bierman, the costs are expensive. Whether they're prohibitively expensive, I don't know. We've not done that piece of work, but it's certainly a piece of work which is on our radar to conduct at some point in future.
And just respond to that, Chair. I understand that you can only limit a study to certain things, and if you stray too far, you'll never get anything done. But I do think it's an essential part of this consideration. I don't think you can altogether detach it, because how you pay is quite important. And the paying by phone, I think it's quite an issue. Now, okay, the payment methods might need to come back separately, but it is intimately linked with what we're talking about now.
Your comments are noted and minuted because it is relevant, yes. Councillor James.
Picking up on the yellow, which is Caston's Yard, and it's 30-minute. Going back to last meeting, I think there was a discussion by Karen about people doing their business in relation to the closure of Anchor Yard. That this going to be the toilet for people that are taxi drivers and things, and so Karen was talking about it being an area of that yard having 10 minutes, so people could pop into the bog and do their business. Because everywhere else where a taxi uses it, they're going to shut it off. So I'd like to look at Caston's having an area of it for 10 minutes.
Yeah, you're completely correct. That did go through, and that was, I believe it went to the officer to be investigated. Was that the phrase we used? Yeah. Whether there could be an up to 10 minutes. Not sure it's totally free, but along those lines, yes.
And the other one was in relation to 12. And I like Paula, I really agree with the principle of having short and long stay. But I don't know, should we be charging for 12, which is a park? And I guess people would be using it that shouldn't come into the town, but it does seem terrible that we're charging for people to use that car park.
Councillor James, car park number 12 is Crossborough Hill car park, which some of you will be familiar with. Yes, I agree. Predominantly, I suppose the function of that car park is to serve the park. But what we have experienced over the years is that is very regularly used by commuters and workers within the town, dare I say it, from some offices, even from these offices. And there are spaces in there which have a 3-hour limit, and up to 3-hour limit, which there is no charge for, and there are other spaces in there which we apply a charge for, which are permit charge, which are an all-day availability, and there is a permit charge for those. So it's about, I can't remember precisely, it's about, I think about sort of 25% of space there are available on 3-hour, and the rest are permit spaces.
If we look at what we have in front of us, the strategic function of each of the council's car parks is defined as set out in Appendix 2, with short stay parking is defined up to 3 hours, long stay defined and and long stay is defined as greater than 3 hours. Then the second point here is the daily cash charges for parking durations of over 6 hours should be introduced in all council fee paying long stay car parks. So charging periods of 6 to 8 hours, 8 to 10 hours and 10 plus hours are the current suggestion. Are we all happy with those proposals? Is that accepted? Thank you. In which case, next slide, please. Short stay car parks. I'm not going to read it out. You can all read it yourself this time. Are there any questions or comments on this?
Can the officer just introduce it, so each section, and then we can...
point A3 is obviously is where we set our charges in relation to our charges for short stay car parks in relation to our competitors. Generally speaking, in virtually all cases, we are below. What we don't have is whether we are a few percent below or a double number percent below. Obviously, what we're trying to do here is to say this is a policy of the council, a proposed policy of the councils, that we would set our pricing regime for short stay car parks, in this case below the regimes that are set by our competitors within the town centre, but at the same time remaining competitive with other towns who clearly we compete with on a town-wide basis.
Councillor Mr James.
What in this section? What happens if a car park that isn't part of what we own goes up and keeps going up? Does it mean that the differential between the two? It's not saying that there has to be a certain differential between the two.
We're not saying here that it should be X percent below our competitors. What we're saying is it should be below our competitors. That's the principle we're trying to seek member endorsement to. If a competitors go, I mean, clearly competitors will set their charge in the same way as we do on an annual basis. So that charge we would review on an annual basis and set accordingly. But bearing in mind the principle of us remaining below our competitors.
Have we considered removing the charge?
Well, I say that's what item 9A, A9 talks about, is this principle of looking at other initiatives which would encourage our town, encourage more people into our town, or initiatives that just made it more vibrant.
Can I move to Councillor Bierman, because you had your hand up earlier?
Thank you. One was just to clarify. I mean, Mr. Wareham keeps using the word competitors, so despite the fact we're saying we're not on a money-making exercise, we seem to be looking at it very much by market forces and on a competitive nature. But putting that small detail aside, A7 says daily cash charges for the Miles car park for stays of greater than 6 hours are set at the pricing regimes of competitors within the town. Does that mean really Festival Place? Is that what we're talking about there?
In that particular case, yes, it does. That's the Miles car park, and what we're saying there is that the charge for that car park should be comparable to our, in that case, neighbour. Yeah.
So we're in that case saying we're not seeking to draw business from the Miles. We're just sort of saying you park where it's most convenient to do your business, and it'll cost you about the same whether you stop off at the Miles or you stop off at Festival Place, depending possibly from which direction you come in. I would have thought in the main. Thank you. I wasn't sure. Just sorry. Let me read my note properly. It's on A6. We are greater than those charges supplied by the council's fee payment. That are greater. I was not understanding what we're saying there under A6. We're greater than those charges applied in other council fee-paying car parks. We're just saying that is because it gets lots of business from the town centre. We're happy that this be our most expensive in effect. Is that what it is?
Essentially, yes. I mean, the offer that the Miles gives to the car park, to the person wishing to park, is a better experience, dare I say it, than the car park which is slightly away from the town centre. It is virtually on top of where they want to do their business, whereas Churchill Way car park, it's a walk of 150 metres or so. So the offer there is better than one of our other car parks, and therefore we feel there should be a premium to the user for benefiting from a greater offer.
Shouldn't that premium perhaps also apply to Central Car Park, because that's also very close and, from my experience, massively popular? I mean, that must be the one that's most often, Mr. Bennett might be able to say, the most often full to capacity of all the car parks. I might be wrong.
Point noted, Central Car Park is of course a short stay car park, has a limit of 3 hours.
Councillor Mrs James.
It was just in relation to the point that Councillor Bierman raised around A7. And you said to me that it wasn't about in relation to the comparator, I'm concerned there that if the competitors do go up, that will then reflect that price, and I'm not so sure that we need to be doing that. I think that the malls attracts people that have a different experience, a shopping experience, than in Festival Place, and we need to ensure that it reflects that. And there are shops like Mataland and all of those shops, and we need to ensure that people that want to park in that area can afford to park there. So that's my first point. And the other point is around Vine Meadow car park. The daily charge is to be set to be comparable with charges made in the adjacent station car park. And I suppose this reflects the paper that we've just had. Is we're seeing in the paper when it was introduced on 6.1 that Vine Meadow car park is going up all the time. And what we're doing is, and when I speak to commuters that are causing a problem in Norden, is we're pricing them out of the car park. And if the railway station is expensive, we need to ensure that there isn't a cheaper option for people who want to use the Vine Meadow car park and either travel to London, who can't afford to pay the fees that they're having to pay in the station car park. Because if we don't, we're then pushing people onto the streets and then causing problems. So it reflects on paper C. So I have concerns about A8 and A7.
Response.
I'll let Richard pick up the response to the latest point, but I thought it was worthwhile making this point, which perhaps should have come up in the original introduction, is that you'll see a distinction between, in general, we're saying that charges up to 6 hours, they should be lower than our competitors within the town and neighbouring towns. So by saying that, we're clearly trying to encourage economic vitality. That's there for the shoppers. What you'll also see, in general, is that above 6 hours, we're saying, no, we won't provide cheaper, in effect, commuter parking. We're setting the above 6 hours, which in effect is our commuters, that will be at our competitors' sort of rate. So we're trying to encourage visitors to the town, but we're trying to discourage, or at least to discourage the commuter element. But Richard, if you can pick up, because there's a clear distinction in A3 beyond around the 6 hour period.
And just to use Tim's words there, to discourage commuters from using our shoppers' car parks. That's the key thing there, because clearly we find that the current regime in the Miles car parks gives you a very, very cheap commuter parking experience. Far cheaper than Festival Place, far cheaper than station car parks. To pick up the point about Vine Meadow has and still is, again, a cheap car parking provision. Is used by commuters, although there is 25 pay on the day space available. That particular car park, because of its relative cheapness, we have a significant waiting list. I think there's something like a 2-year waiting list for that particular car park. And I suspect, I might be wrong, but I suspect those 2-year waiting list people are either parked in the Miles car park or maybe straying into some of the residential areas.
If there's no more questions, can we actually take A3 first? Are we genuinely agreed on the principle of A3? Basically, that we remain competitive in the area. That's what that's saying. So agreed. Thank you. A4. Again, as Banks basically saying up to 6 hours we are competitive. Agreed.
I can't agree with Vine Meadow. I can agree with it if you take Vine Meadow out, but I can't agree because of the impact it has on our wards.
I accept what you say on Vine Meadow, but if there's a 2-year waiting list, I'm not sure how it is fair if we. I'm looking at you, Richard. Vine Meadow. There was an issue. You're the ward councillor for that. The ward councillor for the Vine Meadow said there's issues there about raising it. Could you just explain the rationale again, please?
To park all day in the station car park. My recollection is it's about £10. I wouldn't be totally sure, but it's around about a £10 figure. The equivalent charge or the equivalent cost in Vine Meadow is something like £3-4-ish. Again, I'm not precise on the numbers, but you can see a significant difference between one car park and the other, which is why we have this demand, over demand, dare I say, for season tickets in Vine Meadow. Clearly, we can't provide any more spaces in that car park. The boundaries of that car park are defined, and we've maximised the number of spaces. So the rationale is that we are saying commuters can use our car parks, but equally we were looking to whether we can ensure that the spaces in nearby shopping areas, such as the malls, such as Churchill Way, are used by shoppers rather than commuters.
What I'm saying, there are many people that travel to London who are struggling financially at the moment with the fares to go to London. They maybe not have wage increases or whatever, and they cannot afford to park in the station car park. And if there is no space in Vine Meadow, they're parking on our streets. What we need to do is ensure there is a cheap option available, and we need to ensure that those people that are parking can have an opportunity to park there. It may be, like Paul said, it's for those people that work in the town centre as well. There's a lot of people that are using it that work in the town centre, and there's no other way to get to work and get home, because the buses don't run after 9:20 at night, and they have to bring their car into work. And I think it's important that we keep that as a cheap option, that car park.
Sorry, Councillor James, Tim's just picked up there. I mean, we're talking about point A4 still, I assume. Point A4 is about parking up to 6 hours.
To move on, can we look at point A4 alone? Up to 6 hours, they are again competitive to bring people in to the borough. Can we agree on A4, please? Is there anybody that disagrees on A4? Are you disagreeing?
Yes, because
James?
then what you will do is you will exclude the commuter from using that car park.
No, you won't. Our commuters don't park for up to 6 hours. Our commuters park for 6 hours plus, which is the point dealt with in A5.
A4 was actually passed on the majority. We're now moving to A5, which is the daily cash charges for more than 6 hours.
And that's where I'm raising my point.
So, Councillor James' point is noted under A5. Do we have a majority in favour of point A5? Can we see around the table if there's a... Councillor Baker, you wanted to raise a point?
It was on A5. If I recall correctly, the officer told us that there was currently a 2-year waiting list, which indicates to me that it is currently underpriced, and that there is a huge surfeit of people who are more than willing to pay that price. I feel that if we were to offer a very reduced price, longer than 6 hours, i.e. commuters parking, I think any attempt to try and ensure that it only went to perhaps local residents with limited means would be horribly intrusive and overcomplicated. And I think we are better off making sure that there is adequate cycle parking facilities at the station, and encouraging transfer to alternative modes rather than the car. So I would agree with the recommendation that that it should be set at the same pricing regime as our competitors.
So we have Martin, you wanted to speak?
Yeah, I think I'm saying something similar, but not quite the same. I totally understand and sympathise with what Councillor James is saying, and I suspect as ward member I might go down the same route. Trouble is, if one goes that particular route, one makes the car park so attractive anyway that it overfills and you've got spillage out into the residential roads around. And the only way to solve this is to double the size or triple the size, and that, well, that probably even then wouldn't solve it because of the demand. And I really don't think that there is a totally there's not a solution. There's an amelioration, and I think this is probably the fairest we're going to get, taking the whole strategy of the centre into account and how one car park relates to the other. But I say that with the greatest regret, and would vote with the greatest regret, because I do understand what you're saying.
I made a mistake. Just to be clear, so you don't have to. Your conscience is clear, Martin. It's except for the Mows and Vine Meadow. So I'm sorry, I made a mistake.
Thank you for pointing that. Are we all happy with A5 then? Thank you. A6, which is the Mows car park. We happy with that? Basically that encourages shoppers. Thank you. A7, the Mows for greater than 6 hours. We happy? Thank you. A8. A8. I think Councillor James may wish to speak on A8.
Yeah. No, I think it's really important, and I won't forgive you, Martin, if you vote against this. So I'm going to need you to vote here. It's really important that there are people that cannot afford any other car park, and we need to support them in this economic climate to be able to use this car park. And there's a waiting list because these people can't afford the station car park at the moment. They're parking in the wards around, and they're struggling to get to work, and we need to support those people. And it's not always easy to use a bike, and there isn't anywhere to park your bike, so we need to make sure that we have parking available for them, and it would be appalling if we put that up, and I'd like my vote recorded that I vote against this.
A8, we will now vote as it is in the paper. All those in favour of A8? Thank you, that's passed, and Councillor James has requested her vote against it be minuted. Correct? Yep. Thank you. A9, there's a tiny addition to A9. The bottom part, parks by shoppers or short stay visitors and report back to committee. So basically we're requesting information. Councillor Bierman.
I only just put down a comment in view of some of the earlier debate where there was, and it might even be in the text here, about Christmas. I think it's novel to try perhaps a no-charge day or something if one's going to accept the principle of car parking. But I think the idea of doing it at Christmas, when all the car parks are being stretched to their limits, where we can get the money in, and when we're struggling to meet the demand, to then say it would be free, I think would be quite bizarre. So please let's exclude Christmas from any of the initiatives.
I believe there might be some logic in what you've just said there. We've just added please report back to committee on this A9, because I think this is an ongoing one. Councillor Baker.
I'm sure it's in the officers' minds, but if there is something that might, one of the initiatives might be something like getting when you get a receipt from one of, say, the top of town shops, that gives you a rebate or free parking, so that it actually does tie into what we're trying to achieve from it, so maximise the opportunities to allow people who are actually coming in to shop in one of the shops there to park free, rather than a businessman who wants to nip into the bank. It's made just to try and make sure we can get the benefit to the people we want to benefit, which is actually getting cash through the tills as some of the small businesses. Yeah.
On this one, we can actually agree it tonight, but we're agreeing just to have greater looking at it. Please report back to the officers. Yes. There are potentially, I don't want to use the word benchmark with other areas, but effectively look what other people are doing and potentially consider it. So we'll take A9, but that is unfinished. Thank you. We have 10 come up on the slide.
Point 10 at A10 there. I mean, again, we have no approach to agreeing overnight charges. Many other councils tend to take the approach which we've done, which is to simply apply a token sort of £1 figure. That equates broadly to the 1 hour cash charge for most of our car parks. And we just felt that was an appropriate way to link it, and therefore give some sort of transparency to how we set that charge.
Comments on 10? Professor James.
In relation to some of the car parks in the residential areas, I'm sure that it's used by residents, like in New Road and Southern Road, and that helps them to alleviate the problems not having on-street parking. And it doesn't seem a lot of pound, but if you look at that over a week, and we need to really encourage, like we're doing in Vine Road Meadow Car Park, where we're encouraging residents to do that, we need to ensure that that happens. So
that's noted, Councillor. In fact, it's touched on when we get to part B of this paper on item B11. So we'll perhaps talk about that perhaps when we get to it.
Do we have genuine agreement on point 10 here, please? Agreed. Thank you very much. If you could introduce 11 onwards now, please.
Yes, point 11 is about how we set our business permits or season tickets. I refer to people that have a permit to park in the car park on a regular basis as a season ticket holder. Some people refer to it as a business permit, but I see it as a season ticket holder, and I want to try and sort of introduce that concept within the council here. So what we're saying is to look to set a methodology whereby we use the daily 6 to 8 hour charge as the basis for working out what the season ticket charge should be. In effect, we multiply the 6 to 8 hour charge by the number of chargeable days, and then apply an appropriate discount to that to ensure that the season ticket charge remains competitive. And for Crossborough Hill, we're suggesting that a greater discount is offered simply because of its location slightly away from town, less desirable location for somebody to park, but still people clearly wish to park there, so probably a greater discount would be given to them in that regard. That's A11. A12 is just to confirm a practice which we partially do now, but not in all car parks, whereby we issue, to try and ensure flexibility, we allow season tickets to be bought on a quarterly, half-yearly or annual basis. And point 13 is that where people wish to buy a permit on a half-yearly or annual basis, we give them a little bit of incentive, really. We say, we'll give you a slightly bigger discount because you wish to park your money once a year rather than 4 times a year, in effect. So that's really what we're trying to do there. Currently, we don't take that approach. If the quarterly charge is £100, the whole yearly charge would be £400.
Goes to Mrs. Washburn.
In regard to the the season ticket holders or business permit holders, do we currently know how many people actually take this up and how many spaces are filled with those? And then obviously looking at the discounts, because obviously if we're offering or encouraging people to buy their tickets in advance, obviously that revenue is coming in ahead of people using those spaces. Would we be able to encourage a bigger take up if we offered a bigger discount?
I don't think take up is actually an issue. Most of our season ticket spaces are taken up, and I think in many we have waiting lists for them. I don't think they're quite as long as Vine Meadow, but certainly most where we have season tickets, the take up is generally speaking is fully at capacity now. I was just asking Martin if you could give me some idea as to the number of season ticket spaces, but I don't have that data to hand.
Yeah.
So we have approximately 100 season ticket spaces across all of our with the exception of Vine Meadow, across all our car parks.
And in the main, I mean, are they people that actually work in Basingstoke? Is that what the main kind of thinking behind this is?
Yeah, the criteria is that the people work within the town centre.
Councillor Bierman.
Well, sat where I am down this side of the table, I should bring to the fore my capitalist principles, and that makes me say why this is the commentary. You see, we've got this 2-year season ticket waiting list. Now, that implies that we're obviously not able to service as many people as there is the demand for. I mean, I don't know whether this has been a long-term situation, but it does imply that we're perhaps not charging enough in that respect, and that certainly that we could charge more. Whether we should is another issue. I just would like to, just an observation, you know, I don't strongly feel we should charge more, but I mean that's the implication by the statement there. I just on A11 like to ask where it says with an appropriate discount. In that case, we're not given an idea of what sort of discount we're talking about, and you know, there's a difference between a 30% and a 3% discount, and where are we roughly?
That piece of work hasn't been done, Councillor. To try and kind of put it into context, I did a sort of comparison with rail tickets, and if you took the daily rail charge and multiplied it by the number of chargeable days, 250 odd chargeable days, the amount of discount that would need to be applied to that to bring you back down to what they charge for a season ticket could be 40, 50, 60% in some cases, and that might be the figure we're looking at. But I've not done that piece of work to be able to give you a precise figure this evening, I'm afraid.
Right, if we look at A11, bear in mind this is principles we're looking at here. So this, well, we've just been through it. Are we in agreement with A11, please? Thank you. A12. Agreed, thank you. A13. Agreed, thank you.
Points 14 and 15 are about the use of park cards. These are a prepay card, sort of credit card size, which currently offer you a discount in the region of 15%. By comparison, the other alternative methods of payment we offer, pay by phone, does not offer you a discount. In fact, there's an argument you pay more because you pay a phone charge as well. What we're suggesting here is that the policy principle is that discount offered to park card users is reduced over a 2-year period to 5%. And that the park cards are only accepted in our long stay car parks. Currently they are in some of our short stay car parks, they are available in some of our short stay car parks. We're suggesting it's long stay only.
Do you put this in perspective, how many people have these?
You did. It's not a huge number. You're talking, I think it's, from recollection, it's about 50 odd. It's not a huge number.
Yeah, but the people do use them on a daily basis. So you've probably got 300 to 400 users over the week.
I think what I might be saying is 300 to 400 in circulation, but only 40 or 50 of them used on a daily basis.
Councillor Bierman.
When I read about these, it was all new to me, and I sort of tried to keep up with what's going on in the borough, but that one was certainly, and sadly, no disrespect to the authors of the report, I still couldn't quite work out how they worked, and I think I probably need a private training session. Don't worry about it now. I do wonder, with the sort of numbers that are being talked about, whether it's working economically for us, but no doubt that could be commented on. Because if it still seems to me, despite the amount in circulation, in the overall scheme of things of parkers, 50 can't be a high proportion. And therefore, is it doing anything? And if it's something that's really good and is something desirable, why aren't we publicising it more? Why don't more than just members, those few members who know it and the users know about it? So I think it would be quite good to promote it a little more. And the other thing was just to come back to this transactional fee, because under the phones, it says transactional fee. I think Mr. Wareham said the cost of the phone call, which might be the case, but surely this would be in addition to the phone call, or have I misunderstood it? Right. The pay by phone, if I pay by phone, I pay the cost of parking, the fee that's on the board, I pay my phone cost of making the call, and I also pay a very, very small fee. It's about, I think it's 1 or 2%, sorry, 10%.
10p.
Sorry, 10 pence. Sorry, 10 pence. No, 10 pence. So if I pay £1 to park, I pay effectively £1.10 plus the cost of my phone call. As regards park cards, I can't say this with a great deal of certainty, but my feeling is that park cards are actually probably a precursor to pay by telephone. They are probably a 90s idea rather than a modern day idea, and certainly I think that's perhaps why the discount of 15% was previously offered. Quite simply, might have been perhaps trying to encourage people to switch to these prepaid cards rather than to use cash, which for us from a council's perspective clearly is much easier to handle the prepayment rather than necessarily the cash payment through the machine and all the security issues which go with that. So I think perhaps at its time a 15% discount may have been appropriate. Nowadays it does seem a significant figure, and that's why as officers we believe it should be reduced over a 2-year period.
Can we take A14? Are we agreed? Oh, sorry, Councillor James.
Asking in relation to A15, why a mover? Why not in a short stay? What's the rationale behind that?
Park cards are basically people who are parking all day because they get a discount on an all-day charge. Short stay car parks are 3 hours, and so we've got people staying all day within a 3-hour car park.
Councillors, if we take 14, is 14 agreed? Thank you. 15, is that agreed? Thank you. 16.
The final one on this this particular section of the paper is really about the refund. When a season ticket holder mid-year wishes to hand back their season ticket, clearly they expect a refund. For the council, there is an administration cost of making that refund to them. We've calculated that to be £6, and we believe that that's a figure which we should recover from the outstanding balance on their season ticket. So all we're saying is we believe that's an administration charge we should be applying, which we currently do not apply.
Is 16 generally agreed? Thank you. Would you like to introduce section B?
Just so it's obvious, we've changed to another part of the paper. I've made my table pinky reds, browns rather than blues. That's all. Just to ensure we were clear which bit we were talking about, and hopefully assist you. Certainly, the first 4 points here relate to this issue about what costs should we include in calculating the residence and visitors permit charges. The commentary provided there sets out how we currently charge. The suggestion is that every house continues to be, so every household within the area continues to be eligible to receive one residence permit and 1 visitors permit. That's no proposed change there. With the exception of Fairfields, where currently we only issue residence permit. Fairfields, Flaxfield Road, where we currently only issue residence permits simply because there is not hardly any road space. Road space is greatly limited there. The B2, we're suggesting that the current arrangement whereby we offer visitors permits to people over 75, we believe that should be moved down to pensionable age. The impact is not that significant. It's not a huge difference in numbers, and again I think the numbers are discussed in the paper, but we just from a management perspective as officers, it's far easier for us to determine somebody who is pensionable age rather than somebody who is over 75. It's much easier for us to manage. Point 3 there is what we believe how the charge should be calculated for the 2 permit types. We believe it should be the cost of the council of administering, issuing, and importantly enforcing these areas. We currently work the charge out without including the enforcement costs, and that sort of is reinforced by point B4, where we're suggesting that we should be recovering 100% of the council's costs in issuing permits, administering permits and enforcement permits.
Councillor James.
I'm fundamentally opposed to this. At the start of the presentation, Richard said that this wasn't about income generation. If you look at 12.21, there's a shortfall in the administering of permits of 12,000 odd, and then in relation to the enforcement, there's 6,000. That's, we talk about 20 grand effectively is going to be made up. And it talks about resident permits in other areas in relation to that we are cheaper than. And we had this same argument when we looked at burial charges. It's all, everyone else charges a lot more, therefore we should do it. This is great that we're offering a service. This is a service that a lot of people would struggle to pay anything different, and therefore I think it's really important that we ensure that this is an affordable aspect to living in the town centre. Many people would struggle otherwise, and the assumption here is that we're going to give a reduced amount to a pensioner, but if you're a family, if you're a working family and you're struggling, you're going to have to pay more, and therefore I think we're penalising people for living in the town centre, and this is a service we're offering. It costs us as a borough to offer that service. There's lots of things that we do as a borough, and I think it's something that should be doing, and therefore I cannot support this. I think it would be detrimental to those people's lives in the town centre.
Mr. Beerman.
Firstly, starting with a question. There's so much in this paper in terms of the cross-referencing of topics. I got a bit confused at one stage, but I note the residence permit costs £20,000 a year and a visitor's permit £5,000. And then I read elsewhere, I think, that some people use only the visitors. Does that that seems to imply that you can get a visitor's permit without having a residence permit.
That is correct. We do have situations in some of our permit areas where a resident perhaps who doesn't, who only requires one permit, will purchase a visitor's permit first at £5 rather than buying a residence permit at £24.
So then, how do you know whether there's a little bit of hanky-panky going on?
Yes, further on in the report, Councillor, we talk about this particular issue, and certainly with the survey we did of permit users, we asked the question there about how of whether you used your visitor's permit for your primary vehicle, secondary vehicle, or for visitors as is intended. And I think, again, referring on to the report, I think it was about 25% of respondees were saying that they used their visitor's permit for their second vehicle, which clearly goes against the sort of the spirit of the purpose of having a visitor's permit.
Thank you. That's indeed where it was in the responses that I read about some people using only the visitors but for personal reasons. But does it say in the report, because if it does, I've missed it, do you take action to try and prevent that?
The difficulty is clearly a residence permit will be assigned to a vehicle, your registration number, for example. A visitor's permit will not be assigned to a vehicle because it clearly could be used on a multitude of vehicles. Whoever your visitor is today can have a different registration in the next vehicle. So it is very difficult for us from an enforcement perspective to carry out enforcement against a vehicle which is displaying a residence permit but in fact may be used by a resident on their primary vehicle.
Yeah, no doubt great minds have tried to unravel that and failed so far. So
obviously what we talk about further on in the report is exploring some alternative systems, whether it's scratch cards is talked about as one possibility. So that's a point for further on in the report.
I was trying to assess. Sorry, I was just trying to get where we are at the moment and how that's working. So there was another point I wanted to make, but moving on though. Sorry, moving on was just again with apologies to my colleague immediately opposite. I'm going to have to slightly disagree here that I don't believe residence parking is quite the same as the burial grounds. I think we all will finish up dying, and I think sort of fining you for dying is unreasonable, or fining you too much for dying, i.e. cemetery charges, is unfair, because as I say, there's no real escape that I've found yet. I think parking is more a lifestyle choice, and though we've got to make it livable, and there are all sorts of people in different circumstances, I don't think I'm persuaded that one should make it virtually cost-free, which is where I think you're coming from, and I can't sympathise with that direction.
But that's not what I said. I said, because what we're implying is there's a shortfall of £20,000, and what B3 is saying is that has to be met by the existing permit holders. At the moment, they're paying £24 for a residence permit, £5 for visitors. So those people are now going to have to pick up that shortfall. And
Councillors, can we take it as it's written on the screen here? If we look at... sorry, Councillor Baker, you wish to speak?
Thank you. I think if we perhaps step back a little and think about why we have residence parking schemes in areas. We have residence parking schemes in places which become parked by shoppers, commuters, or whatever else, if there's a free-for-all, rather than for residents. And why does that happen? That happens because if people park in the station car park or in one of the shopping centre car parks, they have to pay, and therefore people move to the residential areas to park. So we could cure the problem by making all the car parks free, and then probably the residents wouldn't have any problems, and we could do away with residents parking. Maybe. But clearly, if we are approaching it by putting a residence permit scheme in to protect the residents from not having access to any parking space in their street because it's being used by non-residents, i.e. shoppers, workers, commuters, then I think that to expect the residents then to have to pay the full cost of enforcing that their road is only used by them to park in, the resident scheme is a way of protecting our income on our charged car parks, and I don't think it's fair to recover the enforcement cost from the residents, because that scheme is protecting our income stream elsewhere. So I really don't think we should be trying to recover the enforcement costs from the residents. I do believe we do have to deal with this issue of the abuse of visitors permits. I really think we have to come up, and I've experienced this visitors permit schemes elsewhere, which are, I think, very similar to the scratch card scheme that the report mentions, and I think we need to do that sooner rather than later. That's all I wanted to say, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Waldridge.
Thank you, Chair. Regarding it's quite clear what the permit charges are now, £24 residents and £5 visitors. Bearing in mind all these proposals for administrative and enforcement costs, which I think has been said comes to around about 20k. How much does that relate to in terms of an increase for residents permits and visitors permits? Have we done that calculation?
No, that calculation hasn't been done. I mean, obviously the reason for bringing you the paper tonight is to try and get this committee's endorsement one way or the other to an approach, and obviously once we have that endorsement, whatever it is, clearly then that will lead us on to calculating what these fees and charges are and reporting that through the annual fees and charge review, which we do, I think it runs about November-ish time.
I mean, I for one would want that information really, because as Laura said, there are families living in the town centre areas, in resident permitted areas, who just could not afford that. So I would want some idea of what the costs were going to be before I could make an informed decision on that.
Obviously, the fees and charges review comes back to, I'm not sure which Ofcom, but an Ofcom in November time. So that is EPP. Thank you, Councillor Harvey. That would obviously be your opportunity to comment on the proposed charge at that time. Obviously, what this paper is trying to do is to agree on a principle which we could apply, and then obviously at EPP you would have your opportunity to comment whether that charge that was being proposed is appropriate or not.
Councillor James, I believe you want.
I'd like to make a recommendation that this committee doesn't support that principle, that we support the principle of the fee as is, and it relates to inflation as we have now. And for us to be imposing such an additional charge on existing residents would be criminal at this time, and I think it would be unforgivable. So I'd like to make the recommendation that it's
we take them as in the order, so when we get to B3,
I've made a
I'll let you speak.
recommendation that as a committee that we don't support the principle of increasing only in line with inflation.
Councillor Bierman.
It depends what one deems to be inflation, of course, at the moment, but I feel I would like to go the Council Waldridge way and have a little more of an idea of the sort of costs one would have. You see, I mean, if it's another couple of quid, to bring it all to balance, I think that wouldn't be unreasonable. But if it's another 200 quid, I think it's a rather different tale. And I feel we need some sort of scale to know what we're trying to work towards.
Thank you, Councillor Bill. I think there's every likelihood that although we're introducing this enforcement, if we were to introduce this enforcement charge to the calculation, I think there's every opportunity, every likelihood that in fact possibly the visitor's permit may in fact come down in value, and that the residence permit may in fact go up in value, and one is offset against the other. That's my gut feel, but I don't have the figures unfortunately to back that up. Sorry. That the residence permit would come down in value, but the visitors would go up in value. Sorry.
Councillors, can we take B1 first? I think B1 we haven't had debate on, so I assume that we're already happy with that. Are we all happy with B1 as it stands, please? Thank you. And B2, effectively we're dropping it from 75 to 65, but saying the pensionable age so it can change with pension. Even with the declarations of interest, are we happy with B2 as it stands? Right. Oh, sorry. Right, can we have a vote on B2 then, if we're happy with that?
I've got a question about B2. What I'm saying is the shortfall that that's going to mean, which I think it says the resulting in a lost income of £875, will that be made up by the existing permit holders? I'm not clear, or what's going to happen in relation to that income?
It would be if you were to agree B4, because clearly B4 talks about 100% cost recovery.
Can I have my vote recorded against, please? Yeah.
Right, we're on B2. Those in favour of B2, please show by hands. Thank you. Those against B2? 2 people. Right. Sorry? Did you want your vote recorded as against as well? No, so it's Councillor Mr James wants the votes recorded against us. So B1 and B2 are now behind us. The debate, I believe, is now going to open up on B3. Councillor James, I said I'd come back to you on B3.
What I'm disappointed is that we're being asked something here, and what we would need to know is, so far we're asking existing permit holders to pick up the cost of older people in their area to park, and now we're being asked for them to pick up the shortfall in administration. There must be some indication of what those costs are going to be. I mean, you must have some idea how many people and what that might be. You're asking people to vote on a principle. If people vote, it could be double the cost. You know, I mean, you can't vote on something you have no idea. I mean, it's appalling to ask us to do that.
I can see the officer looking through some papers. I hope we'll have an answer very shortly. Yes, Baker, did you want to speak?
Yes, I think what we want to know is what the impact will be on of recovering full costs of administering and issuing the permits. And I personally would strongly object to permit holders being forced to pay for enforcing of the permit schemes. So that's how I feel on that item.
Chair, if I could just may just come back about the costs. I mean, if I can take you to 12.2.1, the penultimate paragraph where it talks about the enforcement costs. Enforcement costs of £19,000, income against that from penalty charge notices of £12,000. The shortfall is £6,000. They're 6,290. In terms of the number of permits we issue, just try and give you some sort of scale, we have, It varies year on year, but it's roughly speaking about 2,000 permits thereabouts. So dividing that shortfall by the number of permits, you'd be looking at an increase per permit of somewhere in the order of £3. Well, that would be all permits. That would be all permits. An increase to all permits of £3. That's what that would. Well, there is no shortfall for administering. Is it? Sorry, 12,000. Sorry, yes, enough. Sorry, yes, sorry, enough. Okay, sorry. The shortfall is 12,000 plus 6,000, so 18,000, and again about 22,000 permits. So it's about £9. Sorry, my correct. Stand corrected.
What is the total additional cost that will be added to? Is it £9?
The shortfall, the current shortfall is the £12,000 to £12,300 and the £6,290. Adding those together gives us, broadly speaking, £18,000 shortfall. Dividing that by the number of permits we issue, 2,000, gives us an increase per permit somewhere in the order of £9. That kind of figure.
Have you added in the older persons now that are gonna, that 800 as well? So can you add that in? How much? I'd like you to add that into the cost as well.
That would add another 50 pence thereabouts to the increase.
To make it about a 40% increase in.
Yeah.
Is that what it is?
Yeah.
About a 40 something.
40 to 50.
So we're proposing almost a 50% increase in residence parking. Okay. I'd like my vote recorded against this.
Mr. Bierman?
I certainly think in one hit that would be rather unpalatable. Well, let me finish. And I therefore think if one were to contemplate going in that direction, it would have to be staged so that it was inflation plus a bit. Certainly not the whole whack in one hit if we were to do it at all.
Committee, from the chair on B3, it's obvious that there's some unhappiness with it. If we add into B3 that the long-term aim, and also onto B4, the long-term aim is, would you be able to agree with B3 and B4 if we put the long-term aim is?
So, as I said before, perhaps I should ask for it to be recorded. I don't think we should ask permit payers to cover the costs of enforcing the scheme, because I think enforcing the scheme is part of our income protection for our car parks, and I don't see why the residents should have to pay that.
Chair, can we separate the enforcement and the administration? Because I think they are two different things, really, two different concepts. And it seems to me legitimate that one's talking about the admin rather than...
So, would you be happier if on B3 we took out enforcing, left it, but just take out enforcing and enforcing? So from B3, the charge for residents' visitors permits calculated based on the cost of the council administering and issuing the permit schemes. Would people be happier with that? Right, from the chair I've changed B3, just take out and enforcing. Are we now happy with B3? So we have... Right, can we please have a vote? All those in favour of B3 with and enforcing being removed? Those against, please? Right, could the committee services please note that there's been requested they record against? Thank you. So the last three ladies up there voted against. So B3 has gone through with the and enforcing removed. We now move on to B4. I repeat what I said earlier. If we said the long-term aim, but I also hear what Councillor Baker made very clear just now. So could we have a proposal, please, how we can sort B4 out? Right, if we take enforcement out of B4, I've noted what you've said, Councillor Baker. If enforcement is removed from B4, would you be able to support it?
Chairman, were you putting in there the words as a long-term aim to recover 100% of the cost, or was that on the earlier paragraph?
That didn't seem to get any support, so if we just take enforcement out and leave it as it is, would that be satisfactory for you?
No.
Did you want the long-term aim is in there then? Right, so if B4 becomes the long-term aim is for the council to seek recover 100% of its costs associated with the administration issue of permit schemes. So put the long-term aim and we take enforcement out. I believe that, can we, if, right, so to clarify to the committee, B4 has got the long-term aim and we take enforcement out. All those in favour of that, please show. Oh, that's clearly taken. All those against?
My vote recorded, please.
And again, the three ladies would like their vote recorded against.
Likewise.
Thank you.
Yes, point B5 is about the key worker permit system we currently have. It only covers one area of the permit areas. We currently have 12 key worker permit spaces. The proposal here is to withdraw that, but to replace it with additional season ticket spaces in council-owned fee-paying car parks.
Sorry, questions, discussion on 5, please. Sir Washbourne.
Yeah, I have a few concerns on that. I mean, obviously, under this, you're saying currently the key worker permits are £208.20 per year, and if you do away with them and replace them with the season ticket, obviously there's a bit of discrepancy in charges there. Or will you be looking to give them some kind of discount as key workers still, but under a season ticket?
The intention, obviously, I mean, the principle here is that key workers tend to be long stay parkers. They tend to park all day. And certainly from an officer perspective, we question whether it's appropriate for all day parkers to be parked in what is essentially a residential area. That's why we believe we should be withdrawing the key worker permit spaces on street, but replacing them within the car park. In terms of what we would set that charge at in the car park, clearly we've already discussed the issue there about earlier this evening about the setting of what would be season ticket charges. Yes, we could give consideration to whether we gave a qualifying key worker a greater discount than a non-key worker, for example. That we certainly could give some consideration to.
I believe this actually removes anomalies. That's the whole point of it here, is if you look at how it's worded earlier, there are anomalies here. Sorry, Councillor Washbourne.
Just come back on that. I mean, my only concern is, I mean, obviously, you know, these key workers are obviously going to feel a substantial increase in their parking fees if that's to go ahead, because obviously £208.20 a year is quite considerably less than what we're asking our season ticket holders to pay. So that's just something that I just wanted to just, you know, make comment on.
Pay rise.
Councillor Mr James.
Can I just clarify, in relation to a season ticket holder, what is the cost of a season ticket?
The current cost in Caston's car park, which is the nearest to these key worker spaces, is £185 per quarter, which multiplying that by 4 is 740.
So where at the moment key workers can park for £208. Is that right?
They can park for £208 on street in a residential area, yes.
This proposal is saying that we're going to charge key workers £740.
No, this proposal is saying phase out key worker parking on street and encourage key workers to park in a car park. And as I explained earlier, we need to give consideration to what level of discount we would afford to key workers over a non-key worker. And that goes back to the previous section of the report where we talked about appropriate level of discount.
But in supporting this, if you was to support this, there's no reference in the earlier document in that section to key worker. You haven't made any reference to that, and therefore, if you was to support this, potentially a key worker in Basingstoke-Deane would have to pay. I'm not sure. I'm not good at my percentages, but you know, it's a considerable increase. So we're not only now penalising people who live in the town with a 50% increase in where they live, but it's also if you happen to be a key worker, which we used to value as an administration, you now got to pay. You know, you now got to pay a lot of money.
Thing to bear in mind that we're talking about 12 spaces here. That's another point I just bring it back to. Also, that those spaces are currently enjoyed by one specific set of key workers, which is the teachers in the adjacent school, and they are actually, we know, they are not paid by the key worker. They are in fact paid for by the education authority. If we were to leave these spaces in place, then as it points out, I think in alternative option B for this, is that we would need to define what a key worker is and therefore open the eligibility up to a wider group of people, not just teachers, but a whole list there which I've picked up there.
Historically, in defining what a key worker was in relation to housing, it wasn't where you were going to be paid from, it was the job that you did. And are we saying that because a teacher gets its money from a different source, it's not a key worker, therefore you can pay an extra 600 quid for your parking? God, it's appalling.
Sorry, Councillor Reid.
Sorry, Chair, just a very quick suggestion. With B5, could we actually say replace with discounted season ticket parking? Would that help? B5, could we actually add the word discounted? So replace with discounted season ticket parking, would that help?
Yes, I'd say that would be appropriate to include that, and then I'd certainly believe there would be a need to offer some discount. What that discount is, I don't know, and I'd say it goes back to my earlier comment about appropriate level of discount.
So for the sake of the committee, 5 now has replaced with discounted season ticket. Right, Councillor Mrs James.
In relation to A11, A13, you talk about the discounted offer. It's either 5 or 7.5. Could I just ask the officers, on the £740, if we offered a discount, what would that give? What would that make it if it was 5% or if it was 7.5%? My maths is appalling, so one of you can help me.
A 5% discount on 740 would be, yes, not a lot, for £37, yeah. 50-ish, 52, 53, something like that.
Councillor Baker.
Do we know if we use the typical list of key workers as in the paragraph in the paper? Have you got any idea how many key workers we have in Basingstoke town working in the town centre?
I don't know how many key workers we have working in the borough, in the town area. What I do know is we have 12 permit schemes, which provide key worker parking for teachers in Fairfield School?
I suggest that probably the number of key workers is actually quite a big number working in the centre of town, and I think we risk actually possibly creating a much more complicated and difficult problem than solving the issue of where Fairfield School teachers park. Can we not have... and did I also understand that the key worker permits for these 12 parking spaces are actually paid by the education authority and not by the individual teacher? Could I suggest that we might see whether there's other ways that we can help Fairfield School enable their staff, enable more parking for their staff? But I fear that we're perhaps risking overcomplicating this issue.
Thanks for those comments, Councillor Baker. I think, yes, the principle is, should key workers, i.e. long stayers, be parking on street? That's our thinking behind this principle. It's more appropriate that they're parked in a long stay car park. The question then is, what fee do you set for them? Do you set a significantly reduced figure, or a figure which is slightly below that of a normal or of a non-key worker?
I think the issue here is that we obviously at some time in the past decided that there were particular problems being experienced by Fairfield School, and that our way of helping them to solve that problem was by allowing them this special arrangement, parking on a residential road. And now I'm not hearing that this is the same in any other schools or with any other employers. So what I'm saying is, if do we think Fairfield School does have a particular problem about having an inadequacy of parking on its site? And can we help them resolve that? Because I think the idea of starting with a different level of season ticket parking for all key workers has quite a lot of attractions, but I think it's going to be a huge cost and huge complication for us.
Key worker is a funny phrase to use. It's people that have applied and people that have got it at Fairfields. I believe you're talking 12. And at the moment they're parking on residential streets. That we've heard passionate arguments earlier tonight that residents should be able to park on their own streets without disruption. So what this is withdrawing the key worker permits that allow people to park on residential streets and replacing it with discount season ticket parking in council-owned car parks, where I believe it's agreed all round the committee without a problem that cars should be in car parks, preferably than parking on a street where they're not owning the house next door or living in their vehicle next door. Councillor Bierman.
Can I just follow on from Councillor Baker? I mean, I think we're overcomplicating the whole issue. I look at this list of alleged key workers that are being applied elsewhere. I mean, the key workers are changing from time to time. I know we had a key worker housing policy which had a good sound basis in the past because we were trying to attract certain types of people to the town where there was a noted shortage. We certainly don't have a problem with Connections personnel advisors because they don't exist anymore because Connections being closed down. So there's one issue. I'm certainly would query the importance of getting the Ministry of Defence personnel in, and we could argue about who is eligible forevermore. So we have a notified specific need. I don't see the need for these poor teachers to be saved walking a little bit extra to a car park, so it's much more important that the residents are able to get to their homes, I would have thought, than a worker to get to their place of work. And if they work if they have to walk a few extra yards or meters, I'm very happy for them to do so. So I think the officers need to come up with a simplified scheme to deal with a particular thing that we're aware of. And if another need of a similar type for teachers, which definitely we want to be supporting, or health workers and so on, comes up, that we look at that then when it arises. But at the moment it doesn't seem to exist even, and we are going to create a complicated scheme to address something that isn't a problem.
Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to come back on something that Councillor Beaman was saying there. I think we are tying ourselves up in knots here. We're not talking about a key worker scheme. We're talking about a scheme for those 12 particular permits in that area. When you look at the text above, it says nationally and regionally many councils define key workers as being, and then it gives a list. But we're not saying we're doing that, and we're not planning to do that. We're simply saying we want to withdraw that specific scheme, which is referred to as key worker, but in fact applies to just 12 teachers in Fairfields, and replace it with discounted, we're saying, season ticket parking. We're not talking about any other kind of key worker scheme, or extending it or changing it. Just simply getting rid of those 12 spaces, I understand it, and I think we are overcomplicating things.
If I may just come back on that, I mean, to me, the way I read it, and therefore it could be read later, is that we're implying that there are potentially more than those key workers that we have at the moment, and the scheme that we want to introduce should be wider spread. That was my only concern.
Okay, for clarity, we can ask the officer to tighten this up slightly and say it refers to the current 12 permits be withdrawn and go into long stay car parks. That's effectively what we're saying. Councillor James.
Do we only have the 12? That's all there is. There's no others.
Can I suggest, Chair, that we reword this then, withdraw the 12 key worker permit parking on street and replace with 12 discounted season ticket parking in council-owned fee-paying car parks. Then it's abundantly clear what we need. This proposal is to deal with one anomaly in the council's car parks, that we as officers felt that there was a group of key workers that were able to park on street, yes, in response to an issue that had been identified whenever the permit procedure was introduced there, but to encourage them to park in a nearby car park. And if we introduce the discounted phrase there, then, as Richard has pointed out before, when the fees and charges report goes to EPP, that will be the opportunity. If the view of committee is it should be discounted so it's no more than the current, then that can be a view of the committee. But we would intend to look at what that discount could be and put that forward later on. But this isn't a proposal to introduce a key worker category in parking in all of the council's car parks.
Thank you. Now we've had clarity. All those that agree with B5, can we please show? Agreed, thank you. Could we suspend standing orders, please, 9:30?
Can I vote against, please?
Voting against B5, or... Okay, right. Thank you.
We didn't ask who's against.
It was passed by more than the majority, so... okay.
No. You need to ask, does anyone want to vote against it?
B5, those who would like to vote against, please show. You have your fame, thank you. Now, to remove standing orders, because it's 9:30. Thank you. Proposed and seconded. All those in favour? Thank you. Let's finish the paper.
Thank you, Chair. We're now on point B6. Again, a very similar anomaly to what we were talking about there with regard to key workers. This is some business permit spaces, which again park on street, park in predominantly residential areas. We're talking about 19 business permits rather than the 12 key workers. But again, the intention here would be to move them into a town centre car park, an appropriate car park. And again, you may want to give some discussion about whether that should be discounted or not.
comments, please, on 6. The only, do we leave it as printed or do we add discounted? If there's no, right, all those in favour of the printed 6 in the paper, thank you. Can we have the next slide? Thank you. Point B7 actually is an approach we currently already take. The medical and healthcare practitioners approach us for a permit. We issue permits and we issue them currently at nil cost. That's proposed to continue. The builders and tradespersons, we issue a dispensation permit for £15 per vehicle per month, and again that's proposed to continue. All again, all I'm doing is seeking member endorsement to a practice we already currently operate. Councillor Beerman.
Sorry, thank you. A question and a comment. Firstly, is there... I'm sure most medical practitioners are terribly honourable, like all bankers used to be, but are they? Is there any way in which their use other than on duty can be monitored? Because I could see, you get one of these permits and you basically got free parking if you so wish, whenever.
Probably not is the answer. I mean, clearly some of these practitioners operate 24/7. So it's very hard to be able to show that a particular practitioner is not on duty when they're in a space at 3 o'clock in the morning, for argument's sake. Very, very hard indeed. So I don't think there's a system we could introduce that would allow us to do that, Councillor.
Right, I was just trying to establish the facts. I mean, I don't know, do we at least when they're issued remind them that they're for use?
There are conditions applied to the permits when they're issued. We ask obviously that their employer, we get confirmation of their employer that they are who they are and say who they are. So sort of the evidence to prove that this person is eligible we seek at the time of application. And yes, there are conditions of use issued when the permits are issued.
Thank you. The second part, which was a comment, to do with the building workers. Now, I'm not sure whether there's a massive administrative cost to this, and if there is, then of course it's going to negate what I'm about to say. £15 for a month strikes me as quite a good deal, really, and I'm be interested to know how many use it, but I'm pretty sure that would be attractive. However, quite a lot of building work is shorter term, and a week would be ample. Can we not say £5 a week, which means that the good deal for a month is slightly less good, because I think £15 is too cheap, but it's not unfair on the people who are doing a smaller job. Just a thought.
Other people's comments on that, please?
Yeah, Chair, I'll happily comment. Yes, we could. If that's a desire of the committee, then yes, we could seek to introduce a weekly charge for a builder's permit rather than a monthly charge. So what we're seeking here is we tend to find that those 75 builder's permits we issue in a year, generally speaking, are for people that are having small building works done, perhaps a kitchen fitted, a bathroom, small extension, something like that, and they tend to need a permit that covers them for longer than 1 week. It tends to be in the order of 3 to 4 weeks, and that's why we've generally made them a period of 1 month. But yes, we could apply a charge on a weekly basis rather than a monthly basis.
I'd like to move that small amendment because I think fitting a kitchen quite often you can do in 2 weeks, so it's fairer for them, and vice versa.
Could you just clarify what the weekly charge you propose in here?
I'm suggesting a £5 a week, and that's and then so say if it's a month, very roughly 4 weeks, it's 20 quid. Well, that's what I asked, whether there was a big admin charge.
The £15 for a 4-week period clearly requires 1 visit to the office for that person, one payment of £15, and we issue a permit. Clearly, if we were issuing on a weekly basis, then we may need to charge more than £5. I don't have the figures to hand to be able to tell you what that sum would be, but clearly it would be more than £5.
I don't want to prolong this too much if there's not a sort of strong support for it, but I would say if you're saying that a lot of things tend to be longer, then we would be getting more money in on the longer ones, so that would cover that. And I wouldn't suggest that people come along for 1 week and then renew it another week, another. If they're having a 3-week session, they buy it for 3 weeks, and in most cases they have a rough idea how long the job is going to take, not least because the householder or others have a limit on what time, the amount of disturbance they can tolerate.
To try and move it on, can we add in for B7 and let a weekly charge be looked at? Just leave it at that. Are you happy with that? So are we then happy with 7?
Good.
Thank you. Councillor Mrs James.
Can I ask, in relation to the healthcare practitioner, does that include carers? I mean, is there a definition of a healthcare practitioner?
Yes, it does generally include carers, yes. I'm now looking at point B8. This is similar to what we spoke about earlier regarding car parks. Again, mid-year.
Yes, the last one was agreed, 7. We're on 8. Yep.
Apologies, Chair. B8 is, say, similar to the principle we were suggesting should be applied for season tickets in car parks. Again, mid-year we have residents who wish to return their permit. In the case of a visitor's permit, that is £5, and if there's only a month or two left on the end of the year, the refund we're offering is literally a few pennies and probably no more than £1. So what we're trying to do here is say there is an administration cost to us, and that the minimum charge of £6 for administering this should be made.
Are we all happy? Thank you. All those against, please show. Because I did hear a murmur against anywhere. Right.
Yes, B9 is again similar situation where people apply for a replacement permit, and we don't have a means of setting a charge for that. And this policy proposes that we do introduce a charge, and that charge is calculated by dividing the cost of administering issuing permits by the total number of permits issued.
Are we happy with 9? Councillor James?
No, I'm not happy. I just think it's very expensive. There's lots of reasons why people may lose or need a replacement permit, and I can't understand why it would cost 2,400 for those. And maybe you could answer that question as to why it's so expensive to replace a permit.
The process of issuing a replacement permit is the same as issuing the original permit. We still have to receive that call. We still have to receive the information from that resident. So the administration costs to the council are the same, irrespective of whether it's a new permit or a replacement permit. And hence that's why we believe that the permit holder, if they lose their permit, if they need it replaced for any reason, that they should meet that administration cost.
So is it I'm not quite sure what the cost is. Is it receiving a telephone call? What is the cost? Why is it so expensive?
There are a number of ways, and certainly some recent improvements to the way we issue permits have helped. They can be made by telephone, they can be made by people coming to the contact centre directly into the offices. They can now be made online, and clearly we obviously wish to ensure that the cost is for replacement permits is a minimum, but we do feel we should be recovering our costs for that.
We receive the call or do it online, then we print a new one. I just can't believe that it costs that amount of money, and there's lots of people that lose or misplace things for different reasons, and if it's stolen or whatever else, and I can't support that cost.
Councillor Baker, you wanted to speak.
So the permit's an annual permit. So if I have a permit starting in January and running through to December, and my car gets nicked and I lose the permit in October, if I asked for a replacement for the one that was stolen, I'd have to pay another £24 for the last 3 months of the permit. Doesn't seem to be fair.
The costs of the permits are, or the earlier discussion about the cost of permits was that they were about the administration and issuing costs to the council. That's what was discussed earlier in this particular section of the paper. As I said earlier, the cost of issuing a amended permit, sorry, a replacement permit is the same. We still have to go through that process of taking that call, receiving that call, that inquiry, taking that information from the resident, printing the permit, packaging it, posting it. The costs to the council are the same, whether it's a new permit or a replacement permit, irrespective of when in the year you lose it, whether it's month 1 or month 12. The cost to the council is still the same.
So if we did bring this in, then what we should do is advise anyone who loses their permit not to ask for a replacement one, to simply they're going to have to buy a new one, because at least they get a full 12 months for their additional £24.
Currently, the permit scheme is run for a 1 year period, so they run from March to March or whatever. They don't run for 12 months sequentially.
Councillor Still, please.
Just coming back on Councillor Baker's scenario, if she had her car stolen outside of her house with her permit in, you may be able to claim that on your car insurance. I think you can.
Councillor Waldridge.
Just to clarify, do the permits come with registration numbers in? So if somebody, say, got a new car part of the way through the year, would that apply to them as well? Or so should we be, advising people to get cars at the end of the 12-month period?
The residence permits have a number plate printed on them, and they are particular to that vehicle. If mid-year I chose to change my vehicle and had a different registration number, then yes, I would need to apply for a replacement permit. To give you a comparison, if I wish to change my car insurance to another vehicle mid-year, I would be charged an administration fee by the insurance company. Certainly from my own experience. What we're trying to say here is we're simply looking to recover our costs for issuing another permit.
On 9 here, there does seem to be some dissent. If again put the aim is, the long-term aim of the council is, would that actually help councillors get this through? Right, B9 as it stands in the thing, all those in favour please show. All those against please show.
I'll have my vote recorded, please.
Right. And Councillor James vote recorded. That's gone through.
All 3 of us, please.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Right, the last 3 ladies again, please record against. Thank you. B10. B10 is we have what's called shared use within our permit scheme. So if you are a casual parker who doesn't have a residence permit, doesn't have a visitor's permit, doesn't qualify for any other permits, but you wish to park in one of these residential areas, we have an opportunity where you can park there for a period of time. The period of time across all of our permit areas varies hugely, from 1 hour to I think 4 hours it talks about in the report. What we are proposing here, that it's limited to 2 hours and that it applies on certain days and certain times of the week. That way it ensures that those people that do want to have this casual parking are people perhaps who are visiting the town or visiting somewhere, but they don't create difficulties for residents who wish to park in that street when they return home from work. All those in favour of 10, please? Agreed? Thank you. We move the screen up one, please.
11.11 is again, I think we touched on earlier, Councillor Mrs James touched on earlier, whereby a current practice only in Vine Meadow is that we allow residents who have a valid residence permit to park in the nearby council car park without asking them to pay a charge. What we're suggesting here is that that's extended to all of our car parks, not just to Vine Meadow. It's just simply saying to residents, if you can't park on the street, and if you live in near to a car park, you can park there. It is only for the overnight period. Yes, I must add that. Sorry.
Everybody agreed? Thank you. 12.
Yes, 12 really is just a point for discussion. Some councils, and I'm aware of some in London, do actually limit the number of permits they issue to households based on whether those households have off-street parking or not. You could have a situation in Basingstoke whereby you actually have a house that has 2 off-street parking spaces which only you can use it on your property. But under the current scheme, you would qualify to also receive a visitor's permit and also a residence permit for that area. Your neighbour may not have any off-street parking, and he would qualify for the 2 permits equally. But that would mean the person with the off-street spaces effectively could park 4 vehicles in that street, whereas the person without the spaces could only park 2 vehicles in that street. So what we're just asking you for is your comments on whether we should limit numbers of permits issued to those households who have off-street parking.
Councillor Baker?
In principle, I think yes, on grounds of equity, but also bearing in mind that in most instances, to access an off-street parking space, you're probably sterilising a length of what otherwise would have been curbside parking by allowing a driveway of some kind on. So there is to me, fairness says yes, that we should limit it and should explore that.
Thank you. Councillor James?
It's about need, and if somebody needs a permit, they'll apply for a permit. If they've got off-street parking and they don't need it, they won't apply. But if you have a family of 4 and you have 4 cars, what happens to those other 2 cars if you then don't have the facility to have off-street parking? In my own position, if that was in place in my road, I don't know what would happen to those other 2 cars. Where would they go? And so it's about need. So if you don't need the permit, you don't apply for it. And there are many people in residential areas in our ward that don't apply for it because they don't need it, because they don't have a car, they don't want to drive, they don't wish to, but they still supported. And what was really good when we went out for consultation, they still supported the concept of residential parking, even though it wasn't relevant to them. But they could see the merits to it. And it's about what would happen to those larger families. So again, we will be penalising larger families. What happens to them? Where would their cars go?
Chair, if I may, if I can take you to page 26 of 43, and it's the very top point that starts 56%. We undertook a survey of permit users, and this is the information that permit users said to us. So these are people that have permits. 56% of them have access to other off-street parking facilities.
As I said, they still had a permit, so there must be a need. Otherwise, they wouldn't have had that permit. That you're assuming that for those people that have access to a garage or a driveway, that they only have the 1 car. But it may be that there's 3 or 4 cars within that family, and therefore they need those. Maybe that one of those people living in their house is disabled and has a carer. Therefore, they need for whatever reason, or what. And if they don't need it, they won't have it. You have to pay for it.
Can we move round? There are 2 councillors speak on 12. Are there any other councillors wish to speak on it? Because we're trying to form a committee view. do we leave 12 open-ended and ask for comments to come in, email, verbal, or however to the officers? Right, I'm told they would like a committee view. So we have two options. We either do limit the number of permits if they have off-street, or we don't. Councillor Still.
Sorry, can I just ask a question? Where permits are issued, are the houses like terrace houses and they're like 2 up, 2 downs, or are they big 4, 5 bedroom houses where each house might have 5 to 6 cars, or are they can you just not generalise?
Sadly, you can't generalise. I can think of a road in northern area which has a mixture of both, where you have some, 2 up, 2 down terrace type dwellings that have no parking whatsoever, but equally you have the 4-bed house that has a driveway which can accommodate multiple numbers of cars. So you simply cannot generalise, I'm afraid.
Well, sorry, can I come back? So what we're saying here is you would only issue the permits to people who do not have off-road, but some have residential parking, and they still their own parking, but they're still applying for permits. Sorry.
Yes, they have off-street parking and are still applying for residents and visitors permits.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Sherlock.
What's going to be the cost of enforcing to take away the parking permit from them? Seems to me it's going to be self-defeating.
I'm not totally sure I'm going to answer your question. I'm not quite sure what you mean by the cost of taking away the permit. Withdrawing the permit from one resident, withdrawing it from one resident who has off-street parking may release that permit for another resident in the street who has no off-street parking, and therefore it will be reissued to another resident.
I'm not sure you have answered my question. How do you determine who should have and who should not have a residence park?
Clearly, that's a piece of work that if we were to take forward this idea, that's a piece of work we would need to undertake. We would need to survey each road where we have permit schemes and take a judgment on whether a property had off-street parking or didn't have off-street parking, and we would have to work that into the legal traffic order that supports these schemes, which would say that property number 1 qualified for permits, but property number 2 didn't.
Councillor Bierman.
I think the proposal as it stands is the most equitable. It's never going to be, none of these things can be fair across the board. No way is that possible. So I think that's the fairest. And I do think there is a certain amount of resident responsibility in deciding where it's owner-occupier, where they live, and also how many cars they may choose to have. In some cases, as Councillor James says, there might be a special need, but that won't be always the case, and I think there has to be a certain amount of responsibility, as I say, of the householder. So bearing in mind, you can't have endless permits because there just isn't the space, so somehow it's got to be controlled, and this seems to balance the need and the availability as best one can, even though it won't be perfect.
Excuse me, are you suggesting that they should limit the number of permits if they have off-street?
No, I think yes, that's what the point says, isn't it? And I'm supporting what's on the papers.
I agree with that as well.
Thank you. Councillor James.
We've just agreed tonight in one of the sections to every house having one permit and one one visitor's permit, excluding Flaxfield Road. So this is contradicting this, and that now what we're saying is that there are 56% of permit users that have access to other off-street parking. So you're saying that over half the people that have a permit already now, possibly under what you're proposing tonight and you're voting on, that they won't be able to have access to a permit. Well, I want my vote recorded, and I just find this administration's approach to
The community is unbelievable.
I'm not totally sure how easy it would be to administer when someone makes a slight difference to the garden, whether it then has a place where you can park and doesn't. So I think the administration of it may be difficult.
Yes, I think we not acknowledge that in the commentary, Chair. It is difficult to administer. Other councils achieve it. I'm not saying other councils do it right. Other councils do achieve it. And so what I was simply introducing this paper, members, was try and get a committee perspective on it. I'm not saying we should. I'm just simply asking for that perspective.
Councillor Still.
Chairman, has Councillor Bierman put something forward for us to vote on? If he hasn't, I'd like to. Can I do that now? To move this on? Yeah, that's, and I agree with that totally. So can we take a vote on it, please?
So we've had proposed and seconded for what's on the paper.
Can just be clear, I believe it's proposed and seconded that the council should limit the number of permits issued to households which are dedicated off-street parking. Is that what you're suggesting? Yep.
Bearing in mind that Mr. Wareham said that there are situations that are not quite clear, it might help to put some oil on the troubled waters to say explore ways of, because the scheme isn't there and what's then proposed might be found unacceptable. So if one could introduce those words with Councillor Still's permission, that would perhaps help.
Councillor Still, are you happy with that?
Yeah, just say it once more for me, please, Tim. Sorry. Oh!
The principle is the council should explore the feasibility of limiting the number of permits issued to households which have dedicated off-street parking.
Councillor James.
We haven't got that yet.
Are we happy? Sorry, do we all understand what we're voting on now? Right, all those in favour of the motion, it's just been spoken. Those against?
Can we have it recorded, please? Against.
Right. Committee Services, could you please record? 3 against. Thank you. This is only exploring it. Right, B13.
B13. Touches back on this. Sorry, B13 touches on the issue we've just been talking about, but actually B13 is in response to a particular point made by residents when we did a survey. Residents were saying they wanted more permits issued, and what we were saying here is that for fairness and consistency, we did feel as though we needed to limit the number of permits that were issued per household, and therefore we should continue with the basis of issuing one visitors and one residence permit per qualifying household. So B13 is actually a repeat of B1.
Can we agree? We agreed B1 without a problem. Thank you. B14.
B14 is about, again, this is about where we have our permit schemes. They again apply across various different parts of the town. And the permit schemes operate at various different times of the day. Some operate Monday to Friday, some operate 8 till 7, some operate 8 till 5, some operate on Saturdays as well, some operate on Sundays as well. There's a whole mix match of controls, which actually is quite confusing, I think, both for residents, users of the permit schemes, and also other people who perhaps may wish to park in those areas. And to some extent, I think for our own enforcement officers, it does give some element of confusion. So what we're suggesting here is that permit controls should apply across these areas. The current areas remain, but that they should apply Monday to Sunday, 8 to 7 p.m. That gives you, between those times, it means that residents can park in there if they're displaying their permits.
All those in favour of 14? Thank you. 15. (15) is just catching a point that was made by, I think, Councillor Bierman earlier.
Indeed, yes, thank you, Chair. This whole thing about looking at the visitors' permit scheme, there is scope to introduce a scheme which is perhaps easier to administer, a scratch card type scheme, something along those lines. But obviously pending that review, we believe that there should be where if ultimately we adopt a different charging mechanism for residents and visitors permits, that the first permit issued should always be at the higher charge rather than at the lower charge.
Comments on 15, or are we all agreed? Agreed. Are we agreed? Thank you. 16.
Yes, 16 again is in response to a comment by residents who said that the bay along the street in which they park, they would like to see the spaces marked individually, so it would say that in a particular street there were 10, 12, whatever spaces. We believe that's a very inefficient way of managing these areas, because residents, I think, in these permit schemes, they tend to know their neighbours, they tend to know their neighbour's vehicle, and they're able to almost self-police how many vehicles they can actually get into a particular space. By marking the bays, we believe you may actually reduce the amount of cars that can be parked in that particular street, and therefore we would avoid, our recommendation is, sorry, our policy principle is that we do not mark individual spaces, we simply mark the whole residence area.
Is that agreed, 16? Thank you very much. The meeting's finished, yeah? We're at the end of it. Meeting's finished at 10:05. Sorry for such a long meeting. Thank you.